I am a late 30s average office worker. I've lived my life diligently, and a few years ago, I got married and now live with my beautiful little princess, forming a family of 3. Having worked hard, I've earned the title of manager and hold a good reputation within the company. This might be due to my inability to outright refuse requests, a trait of my personality. Being tall and having a likable face might have also worked in my favor with the ladies. At times, I've been angry with myself for being too naive and unable to refuse requests. However, it's not in my nature to speak ill of others. Thus, I ended up fulfilling various favors without looking out for my own interests until I met a great mentor who helped develop my capabilities. About a year ago, our team embarked on a major project. We worked tirelessly, staying late and working over the weekends. Without a break, the project had a deadline, and we needed to deliver the results by then. It was not something we could postpone, especially since it required direct reports to the executives, leaving no room for mediocrity. I was appointed as the leader of this crucial project. The responsibility weighed heavily on me, and despite only being able to motivate my team members, I ended up resolving many issues myself. Ultimately, the project we submitted was selected, bringing significant profits to the company. Having had mediocre promotions and evaluations until then, seeing my efforts finally shine was immensely gratifying. The higher-ups must have acknowledged this achievement as they arranged a grand dinner for us at an expensive venue, paid for with a corporate card. My team members and I were thrilled, indulging in the lavish food voraciously. Naturally, the dinner included alcohol, and as we drank one glass after another, we began to feel the effects. Just as we were about to wrap up and move to a second location, an executive arrived and settled the bill with the corporate card. The executive is a woman. From what I've heard, she's one of the founding members of the company. Despite being in her late 50s, she is tall and remarkably slender. Her face, reminiscent of a cat's, retains its beauty even as she ages. Not only is she striking in appearance, but her capabilities are also exceptional. It's said that she comes from a well-off family and had the privilege of studying abroad, playing a key role in establishing the company. She is known for her meticulousness in work, to the extent that not even a needle could slip through. Rumor has it that even someone as formidable as her has experienced her share of hardships. At the height of her career, her husband was involved in an accident and has been bedridden in a hospital for years. There was a time when people in the company criticized her for focusing on work, while her husband was in such a condition. I had always perceived her as a strict and unyielding figure. Thus, meeting her towards the end of the dinner was quite surprising. I was so nervous that I hardly remember what I said. As my team members were heading to the next venue, I thought it best to excuse myself. I handed her the corporate card she had brought and sent them off, leaving just the two of us. Strangely, despite the occasion being a celebration, I felt uneasy about the high cost of the meal and even found the situation a bit intimidating. So I told her, "I'll be heading home now. Thank you for coming all the way here late at night." She waved her hand dismissively and said, "I came to encourage you all, no worries. Anyway, where do you live?" It turned out I lived in the same direction as her. Caught off guard, she quickly said, "It's on my way. I can just get off first. Let's share a ride." And with that, She opened the door and got into the car. Unsure of what to do, but feeling it would be rude to refuse, I ended up sitting in the passenger seat next to the driver. Glancing through the rearview mirror, it seemed that the executive, perhaps due to exhaustion, had fallen asleep during the short 15-minute ride home. I too relaxed a bit during the journey, and before I knew it, we had arrived at her house. When the driver tried to wake her, she wouldn't budge, resulting in me having to help her out. It turned out she had already had a drink before coming to our dinner payment. Given the situation and the fact that I was a man, I ended up carrying her inside her house. The driver, who also seemed to fulfill some secretarial duties, opened the door for us, and I laid her down in her bedroom. The driver only opened the door and didn't follow us inside. After covering her with a blanket, I was about to leave when she grabbed my arm. She was lying down just as I had left her, but now, with her eyes open, holding onto me. Then she asked if I would like to have another drink with her. Startled, I stuttered, "Ah, you're awake? How could I drink in the house of a woman whose husband is?" Trailing off before I could finish, she chuckled, sat up at the edge of the bed and said, "My husband, he's been bedridden for over 10 years until recently, when he moved into a nursing home. There's no hope of him getting up, and now I'm truly alone." I was caught off guard, not only by the news of her husband's condition, but also by her invitation to drink. Before I could respond, she went to the kitchen to prepare some drinks. In the ensuing awkward atmosphere, we began to sip our drinks in silence. She served an incredibly expensive wine, and it was my first time realizing wine could taste so exquisite. I quickly emptied my glass, prompting her to ask if I was in a hurry to get home. Caught off guard, I blurted out, "No, not at all. It's just that I've never tasted such delicious wine before. I'm sorry if I seemed upset." To my surprise, the previously icy executive suddenly burst into laughter, tears even welling up in her eyes. After laughing for a while, she suddenly moved closer to me and asked, "Did you say you were married? That you had a baby recently?" as she placed her hand on my chest. Confused by the situation, I took a step back and simply replied, "Yes, that's correct." She then frowned and stared at me intensely. Honestly, at that moment, she didn't seem to be someone 15 years my senior. She appeared much younger, better maintained than women in their 30s and 40s, my peers. She was naturally beautiful, and her age added a sense of allure. Nervously swallowing, she pressed her lips against mine. She kissed me passionately, as if to devour my lips, pushing me back to the edge of the bed. It might sound like an excuse, but I spent the night in a drunken haze. Morning came, and as I was hastily putting on my clothes, I saw her reading documents while sipping coffee. She was wearing a thin silk robe, which only added to her beauty. She no longer seemed the cold, unapproachable figure, but rather more charming as a woman. That's probably why I found myself staring at her until she noticed me. Seeing me just staring blankly, she smiled warmly. She then offered me some snacks and even gave me an expensive suit to change into. I couldn't help but wonder what had happened in just a day, yet I didn't feel bad about it, especially considering I had been feeling drained from endless household chores and child care. It's a terrible thought, but her allure was heightened in comparison to my wife, who only wears tracksuits every day. Since then, the executive and I have occasionally met in private. More often than not, it was she who took the initiative, leaving me flustered on numerous occasions. Whenever we found ourselves alone in the company elevator, she would playfully tap my behind or subtly grasp my hand, finding my surprised reactions amusing and provoking even more teasing behavior. One day, I found her husband at her house. As she approached me, I gave her a look, to which she responded, "It's okay. You can relax. Have you grown tired of me lately?" Vigorously shaking my head in response. She then said, "Can we talk comfortably when we're alone? Call me by my name, will you?" in a voice as soft as a baby's. Eventually, I found myself enjoying these situations. When work exhausted me and I felt belittled by my wife's nagging at home, being called out by her actually became a source of happiness. Initially, my wife was suspicious, but when I explained, I was with the executive. How could I refuse when she keeps calling me? Everyone else is dying to get noticed by her. She didn't say much. Without explicitly denying it, my wife never seemed to imagine the executive was a woman. Now, if I don't go out on weekends, my wife is the one to ask, "Has the executive not been calling you lately?" Of course, at first, she wasn't pleased with how often I had to go out, even for work. However, as I started meeting with the executive more frequently and got promoted faster than others, it seemed to satisfy her. To my wife, my promotion seemed more important than me diligently doing household chores or parenting. Thanks to the promotion, my salary and bonuses significantly increased. With this heightened income, I found myself treating my wife better, albeit with a strange sense of guilt. After the initial promotion, I even thought about taking the executive on a trip to spend more time together. So I sent my wife, our child, and her family on a vacation, despite my inability to attend due to work commitments. Everyone was pleased when I offered to cover the travel expenses. These actions may not truly reflect my capabilities, but it did feel gratifying to be able to strut a bit in front of my in-laws. I have now come to accept my relationship with the executive to some extent, though not exactly enjoy it. I've started exercising, something I previously avoided, and have been diligently taking care of my skin. At times, it felt as if I had to present myself as a more satisfactory product to the executive, which brought on moments of realization about my situation. After going through that phase, my perspective shifted to, this is also part of social life. Given the circumstances, I find myself wanting to make the best use of this relationship with the executive until she no longer needs me. Just a year ago, I considered myself a kind and caring person to those around me. However, as my position and opportunities for personal gain increased, I've become more pragmatic. While I acknowledge that these were my choices, and I must deal with them, there's an indescribable unease and guilt that sometimes arises within me.
Reclaiming my life after discovering my wife's 20-year affair and overcoming the pain of cheating. You never expect it to happen to you, but friends endure the pain of divorce for various reasons. Trusting and loving your partner, you never think you'll join the ranks of failed marriages. Yet when you glance at divorce rates, especially nowadays, you question the institution of marriage itself. The vow, "till death do us part," rings hollow, its significance faded over time. Perhaps I should have noticed the signs, not just from online sources, stories, articles, or simply by being more attentive. Love often tints our perception positively. Despite having a family and a life together, the notion of growing old with someone feels unsettling. Yet the signs were there, and I had glimpsed them before. My upbringing labeled us a single-parent household eventually. Back then, my parents' marriage seemed robust, filled with love and respect. My father toiled hard, his laborious job taking a toll, but he prioritized his family's well-being. Meanwhile, my mother returned to work when my younger sister began school. As children, we were oblivious, but hindsight revealed the signs, unraveling the truth. Her affair didn't commence immediately. I was a teenager when it began, with my brother slightly younger and my sister 3 years junior. It unfolded like many illicit romances do: late work hours, business trips, sudden grooming improvements. Upon returning from rendezvous without smartphones, clandestine calls and unexplained disappearances marked my mother's interactions. The affair's exposure occurred when my father stumbled upon them. He had wrapped up work early, intending to surprise my mother with an outing. She had claimed a half-day for hairstyling and shopping. Instead, he returned home to find her car in the driveway alongside another he recognized. Entering through the back, he discovered his wife, my mother, with her boss in their bed. Enraged, my father confronted him. The man, Jim Thompson, left our house battered. My father quickly realized that infidelity held no weight in a no-fault divorce country. Some argue possession is 9/10 of the law. Attempting to oust her from the house, he faced resistance from my mother's family. With the house in both their names, she refused to leave. Caught in a bind, staying would thwart divorce, requiring a year of separate living. Despite trying to evict her for infidelity, it wasn't legally enforceable. No-fault divorces can feel unjust, especially when infidelity leads to the split without repercussions. Eventually, my father moved out, unable to find a place for us all. I confronted my mother, planning to move in with him soon. My younger siblings were unaware, puzzled by our father's absence. During that tumultuous year, my mother maintained our visits with our father, who struggled emotionally. He confided in me, admitting we were his sole motivation. He aimed for custody and a home, a distant hope in a system biased against men. Despite my desire to live with him, custody favored my mother, as my siblings were deemed too young to decide, leaving us in her care. A silver lining for my father was Australia's lack of alimony. Though spousal maintenance exists, it's not always granted. With our mother earning well, he only had to pay reasonable support. Unlike the US, Australian child support is fair for the non-residential parent. This spared my father from financial ruin. The following 4 years were tough. I resented my mother, making it clear to any suitor she brought home. By 16, I left her in tears. We barely spoke, and I avoided home as much as possible. Post-divorce, my father found love with Naomi, also divorced. I embraced their relationship, and she became a loving figure to us. Despite his reluctance to remarry, they lived together happily. When I turned 18, I left home, unable to tolerate my mother. My parting words were harsh, reflecting years of pent-up frustration. Despite our rift, she cried as I left. I reassured my siblings and promised to stay connected before bidding my mother farewell. My mother's experience made me cautious with women. Aware of my monogamous nature, I sought the same in a partner. After reading numerous articles on infidelity post-high school, I dated casually, aiming to find someone deserving of my trust and love. At 21, working as an engineer and pursuing advancement through night classes, I met Kylie, a recent university grad. I met her at a corporate event where I represented an engineering company while she worked part-time as a sales rep for another firm. We hit it off instantly, and by day's end I had her number, promising to call. "Got a hot date?" Mark, my roommate, teased. We had agreed to share expenses to save money. Something like that. "Is this the girl from the conference?" "Yeah." Finally mustered up the courage to call. I smirked. "Back off, Dave. Just wait a couple of days not to seem too eager." Trust me. She was thrilled when I called and eager to meet. After applying aftershave, I felt confident. Not wanting to look unkempt, despite a decent job, finances were tight, but I felt comfortable. We agreed to meet at a local bar, taking things step by step. I typically avoided dinner on first dates to sidestep the free meal scenario. Entering the bar, I spotted her on a stool, already enjoying her drink. Her eyes lit up when she saw me, and my heart raced. Over drinks, we opened up. She confessed her temporary role in the corporation, chosen for her looks, attracting unwanted attention from married men. It disgusted her, and I understood her frustration. While my mother's infidelity was known to me, I discovered that both genders were equally guilty of cheating. Researching online statistics, I was shocked by the high number of men and women admitting to extramarital affairs. Articles in Australia portrayed us as notorious cheaters. "You were a perfect gentleman," she said, holding my hand. "You maintained eye contact and remained professional until asking for my number. You were genuine. I just wish you were single," I assured her of my single status, vouching for myself through my friends. She smiled, expressing her trust. Having been hurt before, we took it slow at first, meeting for coffee or drinks during the initial weeks. On the third night, we shared our first kiss over drinks. Knowing about each other's family backgrounds, it felt right, and we both sensed it. Soon, drinks turned into dinner, and a week later, we made love for the first time at my apartment. A month later, she confessed her love, and I reciprocated. Despite my father's past, Kylie had won my heart. As she found a stable job, we discussed serious matters like living together, buying a house, and starting a family. We agreed to buy a house together before marriage, luckily avoiding the housing boom in Australia. However, due to her bad credit history, she couldn't co-borrow on the mortgage. My father stepped in as a co-borrower, saving the day. Kylie was deeply grateful to him, and her parents adored me. 3 months after moving into our new home, I proposed, and our engagement and wedding plans were met with joy. Marrying Kylie was the happiest day of my life. We exchanged vows in a park, surrounded by loved ones, both grinning with happiness as we committed to each other. Our honeymoon, a week on a Pacific island, led to the discovery of her pregnancy. 9 months later, our beautiful daughter was born, followed by a son 18 months later. Deciding 2 children were plenty, she opted against surgery, instead choosing birth control. She balanced motherhood with part-time work until both kids reached middle school, then resumed full-time employment. By our mid-40 seconds, I was a regional manager for engineering companies, often traveling. Kylie ran her own real estate office, occasionally visiting the CBD headquarters. Our daughter moved out to live with her boyfriend, while our son pursued university studies. Married for over 20 years, our love remained strong. Though I could admire other women, my heart belonged to Kylie, and I never strayed. My father's experience always lingered in my thoughts. I should have been more vigilant, seeing the signs earlier. When I finally acknowledged the truth, I knew I had to prepare for the worst. You never think it'll happen to you. Do you think she's cheating? Dave asked, surprise evident. Buddy, she adores you. I was naive, Dave. I hoped our relationship would improve once Steve left, but her behavior resembles my mother's. The thought of that woman made my blood boil. I barely interacted with her over the past 2 decades. She attended my wedding, but only because my father insisted. Now married to Naomi and retired, he urged me to extend the invitation. I complied reluctantly, feeling pressured not to appear as the villain. Besides occasional texts about her seldom visited grandchildren, I kept my distance. Kylie understood and didn't push for a relationship with her either. What's your plan? Gather evidence and leave her if she's cheating. Or how? I have ways. Lately she's been unusually secretive, my fault for trusting her. Now I'm preparing for the worst, meeting with a private investigator Monday to confirm suspicions. No need for photos, just evidence. It's a shame you can't divorce for infidelity. True, but early defense can help. Luckily, she waited until the kids were out. Plus, there are details in our lives she's overlooked that could help. He sympathized, patting my shoulder. I'm sorry, buddy. Sipping my beer, I confessed, me too. Can't stop loving her until I'm sure. Maybe I'm just paranoid, but the signs are there. The next morning, I visited Dad. Seeing my troubled expression, he offered a beer and patience. He and Naomi, still deeply in love, reminded me of their enduring bond. Though their initial relationship was short-lived, Dad wanted her as his wife. I suspect Kylie's having an affair, sighed Naomi. Dad muttered, not again. I'll hire a PI Monday. The signs are clear, Dad. Same signs you mentioned with Mom. She's read a manual on infidelity evasion, it seems, but I woke up. What's the plan? I smirked. Naomi chuckled, sensing my grim expression. Dad, I'll transfer my house to you. Kylie's name isn't on the mortgage. Legally, we own it. When I'm gone, she's a tenant. I'll gift you the house by removing my name from the deed as per state and federal law. Then we sign a lease. After the divorce, I'll outline how to legally evict her if needed. Thought this through? Naomi asked. Kylie knew our terms on fidelity. She breaks them, she's out, no alimony or support. Thankfully, I won't fund a cheater. I sipped my beer, vexed. Hope I'm wrong. Returning home, Kylie lounged on the couch, greeting me warmly. Where were you? She asked. Just talked with Dad about a job, I replied. Suspicions gnawed at me. Lacking concrete evidence of her wrongdoing, if she was unfaithful, it wasn't with someone she saw daily. I dreaded the possibility of sudden girls' nights out. Despite occasional late work nights, she assured me of her love, but doubts lingered. The idea of her betraying me sickened me, yet without proof, I had to trust her, albeit cautiously. Monday arrived and I went to work as usual. Despite our routine breakfast and affectionate exchanges, I harbored plans to meet a PI at lunch to monitor Kylie. After 2 decades of marriage, it was unsettling to find myself hiring a detective reminiscent of old detective movies. She noticed my surprise and with a smile detailed the process and costs. Will she notice the money movements? No, we have separate accounts but share one for bills. Why suspect an affair? I recounted my mother's infidelity, my father's discovery, and our current situation. "How's your bed life?" she probed. "Started well after our son left, but slowed 6 months back. I'd have closeness nightly if possible." "Observed changes in her behavior?" "Yes, subtle ones. Enough for suspicion." I grinned, not a full communist parade, but enough red flags. She outlined services, including phone tapping and surveillance, admitting some might be legally murky. I clarified it wasn't a permanent affair unless I was blind. I had no clue if she was meeting someone during lunch, working late, or seeking occasional flings. I just wanted the truth. Given time to ponder, I'd initiate surveillance next week. Giving up closeness was tough. Unsure of her fidelity, the idea of sharing her made me uneasy. I could have feigned illness, but honesty prevailed. I wasn't interested. Rejecting her advances likely puzzled her. She queried if work stressed me, and I, preoccupied, confirmed. She reaffirmed her love as always. I called Wednesday, initiating surveillance. Doubts gnawed, wondering if it was all in my head. Despite evidence from the investigation, it took a month of resistance for her infidelity to surface. Meanwhile, I immersed myself in literature on cheating spouses, prepared for a marital breakdown. I began preparations, assembling an evacuation bag and moving belongings to the car. Workers knew I'd be leaving soon. I just needed to set a date. Our home was solely in my father's name now, and my wife wasn't mentioned in the lease. Hopefully, she'd be out within a few months. It was Friday evening, and I arrived home as usual. Typically, Kylie would be in the living room enjoying TV and wine. We'd order takeout, chat about our week, cuddle, and head to bed. Fridays were usually great, especially since the kids moved out. We'd make love all weekend, but this time, I heard her bustling in the bathroom, which struck me as cliché. I grabbed a beer and settled on the couch in darkness, waiting for her. When she emerged, instead of the expected seductive attire, she wore a colorful blouse, short skirt, stockings and heels, with styled hair and makeup. She looked stunning, though it wasn't for me. It took a moment for me to realize, "Oh, Mark, I didn't realize you were here." "I arrived home at my usual time, Kylie. You seem pretty occupied getting ready for whatever you have planned." "Where are you off to?" She hesitated. "I have a date tonight, Mark, with John from work, just a work thing." It was a blatant lie. I knew John, her affair partner, from her company's head office. He was married with kids around our age. I'm not sure what she expected me to do, but there comes a point when a man washes his hands of it all. If she thought I'd beg or plead, she didn't know me. I stood up, meeting her eyes as I approached. She flinched and I smiled, heading to the kitchen. "Aren't you going to say anything, Mark?" "No." She had no clue how ready I was. We were both good at pretending, but I wasn't going to deceive her with lies. "Fair enough. I'll be back later. We'll talk then." I didn't respond, but followed her to the door. She glanced back, looking uncertain. Whether it was guilt or not, I didn't care anymore. "Good night, Mark," she murmured. "Goodbye, Kylie." She likely understood my unspoken message, but perhaps she thought I'd tolerate it like those other men. But I wasn't going to be a betrayed man. I wouldn't stand for it. I had no interest in open marriages or any of that. It undermines, degrades, and completely disregards the marriage vows. Once she departed, I sprang into action, grabbing my evacuation bag and another suitcase. I loaded them into the car. Thankful for modern technology, I handled everything online or through phone apps. Our debt was minimal, just one credit card, which I promptly paid off and canceled. After settling upcoming bills, I transferred most of our joint savings to my account, leaving her enough for a couple of months' expenses. With possession being 9/10 of the law and the house in my name, she'd soon realize she was on her own. Walking through the now tainted memories of our home, I sighed, sipping my beer. I had 3 calls to make, one easy, the other 2 daunting. "Dad, she's confirmed. She's cheating. She admitted she's going on a date tonight. The plan starts now." "Where are you off to?" "Adelaide. New job for a year. After the divorce, back to Sydney. That's the plan." "Got it, son. I'll keep your whereabouts under wraps. New number?" "Sorting it out on arrival. We'll send my address." "Drive safe and stay smart." "Dad, I'm just leaving a cheater. Feel like history repeating." "You've done nothing wrong, Mark. Find peace. Move on. We love you." "Kids? No, not yet. Thanks, Dad. Talk soon." Calling my kids was tough. First, my daughter. She cried hearing it, heartbreaking. I reassured her of my love, but I'm leaving for now. We'll email new details. As for my son, he took it stoically, calling his mom a cheat. He only asked what I'd do about him. I'll find him and tell his wife the truth. No revenge, Steve. This is real life, not some made-up story. I'm heartbroken right now. but all I'll do is wait for the divorce and then somehow rebuild my life. I'll only be 46 when it happens. Can she demand counseling? Our marriage and divorce laws are different. Forget about those stories. Based on state laws, as long as we've lived apart for 12 months, I can file for divorce. I won't even be required to attend court, though I will, just to make sure everything goes smoothly. She can't demand counseling after 20 years of marriage? Steve, be careful. You know how tricky the courts can be. If she's persistent enough, then I'll just take my evidence to the counselor, put the pictures in front of them, and ask them if they'll stay married to the woman who's cheating on them. Okay, Dad. Take care of yourself and keep in touch when you get to where you're going. I'll keep you in the loop, as I believe Mom will be contacting me. She knows Lottie will protect you. Thank you, Steve. We'll talk soon. That was it. I left Kylie a brief note mentioning my departure and that my father would contact her. No explanation given, leaving it as a surprise. I notified our children, as my father had done. If her parents inquire, I'll share proof if necessary. I left my wedding ring on the coffee table with the note and copies of evidence, keeping the originals. Driving away from the house, I felt a weight lift. I booked a hotel outside the city to plan my move to Adelaide. Taking 2 weeks, I explored small towns along the way. In Adelaide, colleagues welcomed me and showed me around. I chose a modern apartment in North Adelaide, opting not to buy due to high prices. I planned to return to Sydney after a year. Once settled, I updated my family on my new location. Charlotte called right away, eager to visit. I missed her terribly, so I arranged for her to fly over for a month. My son was wrapping up his studies, planning to visit me for Christmas, a mere 3 months away. Meanwhile, my father updated me on Kylie's activities. Did you know she didn't come home until the next morning? Yes, I replied. I held off on interrupting the private investigators curious about her actions that night. They went to dinner, had a romantic evening, and spent the night in a city hotel. Satisfied, I thanked the investigators and settled their fees, as their services were no longer needed. Later, my father informed me of Kylie's reaction upon discovering the note, evidence, and my absence. She called hysterically, contacted our children and her family, but I ignored her calls and marked her emails as spam. A week later, I confronted her with the lease and house ownership documents. She realized the situation was legally binding and had 3 months to find a new home or face eviction by the police. Despite still residing there, my father sensed she intended to move out. Has she inquired about me? Certainly. She's asked about your family, kids, friends, even your workplace. She's consumed by guilt for discarding our 20-year bond. Has she offered any explanation? Not really. She's remorseful, sure, but it's the same story as your mother's, sorry for being caught, not for the infidelity. Cheaters often live in a delusion where they think they're blameless. They claim it was just physical, but I never strayed for mere physicality. Even in my 30 seconds and 40 seconds I had offers, but I stayed true to my vows because I loved my wife. I found love again with Naomi, Mark. Take time to heal, grieve your marriage, and when you're ready, welcome someone new into your life. There are countless good women out there. Thanks, Dad. Love you, son. Work became my refuge, keeping me occupied. I traveled across South Australia visiting stores and suppliers and spent weekends exploring the Barossa Valley. Divorce transformed me into a firm negotiator, unwilling to compromise unless it benefited my company. Fortunately, my bosses were pleased with my performance and even suggested I stay in Adelaide permanently. A month after settling into my apartment, my daughter visited. At the airport, she joyfully shouted, "Daddy!" and ran into my arms. We spent a week together, and despite my work commitments, I prioritized our time. During our conversations, she revealed that her mother had bombarded her with calls, attempting to justify her actions. Reluctantly, I showed her the evidence I had. As she read, tears streamed down her face, and she expressed her anger toward her mother. Despite assuring her of her mother's love, I feared it would take a long time, if ever, for her to forgive her. The day she departed was painful for both of us, knowing she wished to stay for my sake. We embraced for what felt like an eternity before she had to go. Throughout the months of my marriage crumbling, I remained stoic, harboring more anger than sorrow. However, as my daughter drove away, I couldn't hold back tears, realizing the depth of my loneliness. Yet her visit rejuvenated me, and I found solace in nightly conversations with her, frequent calls from my son, and promises of support from my siblings. My father kept me updated on developments, while old colleagues from Sydney reached out for casual chats and laughs, offering a semblance of comfort amidst the turmoil. About 6 weeks before Christmas, lightning struck once more. Strolling through the aisles of the nearby supermarket, I found myself in a state of boredom. Grocery shopping used to be a joyful activity with Kylie, filled with laughter and goofiness. As I reached for a bottle of salad dressing, I collided with another shopper reaching for the same item. Our eyes met in surprise. "I think I startled you," I admitted. "No, my fault entirely. I didn't see you there." "Please take the bottle. I'll find something else." She insisted. "But it's the last one," I replied with unexpected confidence. I proposed, "How about this? You take the bottle and we grab coffee afterward." Struck by her touch and captivated by her beauty, I extended my hand. "I'm Mark." Her smile illuminated her face as she replied, "I'm Jennifer." Sensing her soft skin as we shook hands, I asked, "Do you often meet men in supermarkets?" "Mark," I chuckled. "No, you're the first." "And are you single?" "If not, I'll retract my invitation, but if you are, I hope you'll accept." She had shoulder-length brunette hair and wore thin-rimmed black glasses that accentuated her bright blue eyes and small nose. With full natural lips and a classically beautiful face, I couldn't guess her age. Despite my curiosity, I restrained myself from sizing her up, though I figured she was shorter than me by about 6 inches. Her smile suggested she liked what she saw. "I'd love to grab coffee. Can I have your number?" After exchanging numbers, she texted, "I'll finish shopping in about half an hour, then head home to put things away. But I can meet you in a couple of hours if you'd like." "Are you local?" I asked. "Yes, I live nearby," she replied. "Same here. I avoid long drives just for groceries. Let me know where you'll be, and I'll meet you there." Moving the cart ahead, she rested a hand on my forearm. "See you soon, Mark. It's been too long since I've had a date." At the coffee shop, I caught her tone and met her gaze, sensing the pain mirrored in her eyes, a reflection of my own struggles. "I'll text you once I'm home and let you know where to find me." Finishing my shopping, I hurried home, storing everything away before showering and changing. Before leaving, I texted Jennifer about meeting at a nearby coffee shop I enjoyed, and she responded, mentioning she frequented the same spot and wondered if we'd crossed paths before. I'll admit I felt a bit nervous waiting for her. Though I dated my wife throughout our marriage, this was my first real date in 20 years. When Jennifer arrived, she seemed overdressed but stunning in a sundress. After getting drinks, we talked and got to know each other. Jennifer confessed she was amazed by my confidence in asking her out at the supermarket. "When you touched my hand, Mark, I felt something," she admitted, blushing but shaking her head at the idea of it being just her imagination. I've read about such connections, but I always thought they were just stories. As she extended her hand, we shared a smile, and as I grasped it, she whispered, "I felt it again, definitely from my side." We didn't delve too deep into our stories, especially on a first date. I recognized her name and noticed her bare left hand, though remnants of a ring were evident. She worked as a kindergarten teacher but had no children of her own, residing solo in a small apartment with a handful of close friends. Her parents and younger sister lived in the city, and she revealed she was 35 years old. "Oh," I responded. "I'm 45. "Your age doesn't matter, Mark. What matters is the kind of person you are," she assured me, prompting me to admit my recent breakup. Seeing her anxious expression, I suggested another drink, sensing the need for an explanation, though reluctant to divulge everything on our first encounter. She surprised me by saying, "No, Mark, I trust you for now. I can see you're hurting. Is it that obvious?" "I've seen the same look in the mirror," she confessed, taking my hand and offering comfort. "It gets easier day by day. Eventually, the person who broke your heart won't matter anymore." With a reassuring smile, she added, "And then perhaps you'll meet someone who begins to mend it. It may take time, but it happens." My father always said the same thing. "Your dad's got some wisdom," I remarked as we polished off our second glass and headed outside. Approaching her car, I felt a bit uncertain. Should I kiss her, hug her, or just bid her farewell? Opting for a hug, I found myself reluctant to let go, surprised by the intensity of my attraction to her, yet eager to explore it further. It seemed she felt the same, neither of us wanting to break the embrace. "Give me a ring this week, Mark. I'd love to chat again." "How about tonight?" Her giggle tugged at my heartstrings. "Feel free to call any time." That night, and every night after, I dialed her number. I suggested Friday dinner to avoid disrupting her regular teaching schedule. When she agreed, I couldn't contain my excitement, practically dancing around my apartment after we hung up. At Thursday's conference, my upbeat mood sparked comments, with everyone assuming I was seeing someone. To avoid jinxing it, I mentioned my coffee shop date and upcoming dinner with the same person, stating I prefer dating one woman at a time. Opting for a restaurant with stellar reviews, I dressed smartly, despite its casual vibe. Upon arriving, I found Jennifer already there, looking nervous. Without hesitation, I leaned in for a kiss, which she reciprocated. "Wow," she whispered. "If that's how you greet me, I can't wait for our second date." As we were seated in a cozy booth, our conversation flowed effortlessly. We split appetizers and desserts, enjoying each other's company and losing track of time amidst captivating conversation and shared glances. The meal was excellent, and the service was attentive yet unobtrusive. I settled the bill and suggested heading to Holland's for another drink, which Jennifer readily agreed to. Leading her there, I chose a tranquil bar with soothing piano music in the background. Jennifer sipped a cocktail while I enjoyed a bourbon. Eventually, she asked what was on my mind, and I poured out my thoughts, our meeting, our lives, our children, and our careers. Then I opened up about my father's struggles, my strained relationship with my mother, their divorce, and how it made me realize my own marriage was crumbling. I confessed that I was technically still married but separated, relocating to finalize the divorce. I assured Jennifer that if she saw my actions as cheating, I wouldn't hold it against her. My marriage was effectively over. The legal process was just a formality. I explained that I would return to Sydney to complete it, and that if she were to meet someone in Adelaide, we'd need to discuss our options. Being away from my kids in Sydney was tough, and the thought always weighed on me. I missed them every day. Jennifer shared her own story, revealing that her ex-husband was charismatic but controlling. Ignoring her parents' warnings, she fell in love at 19 with a man 6 years her senior. Initially, she didn't notice the warning signs, but gradually he isolated her from family and friends. Forced to work and serve as his maid, her situation only worsened over time. I stood up to him, which he saw as disrespect toward him. Whether it was my clothes or coming home late, he accused me of cheating. If I spent money on myself, he called me financially irresponsible. There was never any positivity from him. He was always negative. "I doubt he'd ever say anything good about you, Jennifer," I whispered. I knew I had to get away. He was unstable, and I feared he'd either hurt me physically, sending me to the hospital, or completely break me. Tears streaming down my face, I called my father, begging him to rescue me. He arrived with 2 uncles and friends. My ex-husband tried to fight them off, but facing men was different from attacking a woman. With a single punch, my father subdued him, and they tied him to a chair while helping me move out. I immediately sought help from the police, getting a restraining order and an AVO against him. It's been 7 years since our divorce, and he has no idea where I am. I've hardly dated Mark. Fear has consumed me for so long. She looked into my eyes, her own searching. Then, I met you, and emotions I hadn't felt in ages flooded back. I never felt them for him. She sat behind the wheel, but I sensed she wasn't in a condition to drive, so I offered to take her home instead. Pausing in front of an apartment building, I remembered considering it before choosing my current place. After walking her to the door, she hesitated, so I took the initiative, pulling her close for another kiss. "I had a wonderful night, Jennifer. I'd love to do it again this week." "Any night works for me. I'm a pretty good cook." "How about dinner?" "I'll bring something too. I'm not too shabby in the kitchen myself." She grinned. "Let's make it a cook-off. Wednesday sound good?" "Perfect, Mark. And expect your usual nightly call tomorrow." "How about the beach? Just want to have fun." When I arrived home, I waited until I was settled on the couch with a beer before checking my phone. "Had a great night, Mark. Wanted you to stay, but let's take it slow." "Agreed. Bring clothes Wednesday, too. Early for more than sleep." "Mark, tired of sleeping alone, Jennifer." "Me too. My bed feels empty since you." "Picking you up at 9 a.m., breakfast and beach. Your favorite color?" "Usually blue. On a woman, black or red." "Perfect. See you, Mark." "Sweet dreams. Beautiful." The last message was a heart-stopper. The next morning, Jennifer honked outside. She greeted me inside, joking about needing a broom for the men. After breakfast, we hit the beach, spending the day there, occasionally cooling off in the water. "Or drink?" "Love to, but don't want to leave. Change and come back for drinks. Stay the night," she whispered. I dashed into the house, quickly packed a bag and hurried to her place. Out of breath, I knocked, and she laughed, pulling me inside. The next morning, she made breakfast, and we lounged around her apartment all day. The silence between us was comfortable. "No rush, Jenny," I whispered. "We have time." I realized I was already in love with her, hoping it wasn't just a rebound from my recent divorce. But I wanted to believe it was fate that brought us together at the supermarket that day. We didn't text much during the day due to her teaching schedule, but we spoke every night. My CO workers knew I was seeing someone, and I informed my family in Sydney about her. My dad updated me on Kylie's situation. She was close to moving out and still searching for me. Wednesday night arrived eagerly. Jennifer prepared a delightful dinner, and her dessert struck a chord with me. "They say the way to a man's heart is through his stomach," I chuckled, patting my belly. "I love you," she whispered, turning to kiss me. "I love you too," I replied with a smile. "Isn't it too soon?" she questioned. "Not at all, Jenny. I knew from our first date that you're the one I want to spend my life with, and if being closer to your kids means moving, I'm in, I assured her. Are you sure? She asked. My heart says yes, I affirmed. Let's see how it goes. That night, she visited my apartment for the first time, finding it a bit bachelor-like but clean and tidy, understanding it was just a temporary residence. When marriage was mentioned, she blushed and turned away. Her wrist gently held. I confessed I was already contemplating it. Jenny, I can't recall feeling this much love since Kylie. Not because she hurt me, but maybe it's the freshness, maybe age and experience, but I love you, Jennifer Morris. One day, I want to be Jennifer Williams, she whispered in response. For the next few weeks, we were inseparable, spending every night together, mostly at her nicer apartment. I kept my kids updated, but they wanted to meet her before talking more. Before Christmas, I asked my son about his mother. I told her I wouldn't be there, he said. She probably knew you weren't in Sydney, he added. Elle's not talking to her much either. My sister would visit soon. Are you sure you want to leave, Dad? My son asked. We're all considering moving there to be closer to you, he added. Jennifer squeezed my hand, showing support. Think it through, Steve, my son advised. I know it's a big step, he added. Trust me, Dad, you're more important, he reassured. Jennifer looked at me surprised. I still need to go back for the divorce, I reminded. Just don't rush it, my son cautioned. I know, but leaving your mother was planned, I explained. To hell with her, my son declared. Jennifer accompanied me to the airport when my daughter arrived, bringing her husband, Tom. Charlotte rushed into my arms, reminiscent of our joyful reunions. After school, tears flowed as I introduced them, evoking an emotional moment. The next day, my son surprised me at my apartment door, and we shared a heartfelt hug. Jennifer remarked on our resemblance, though I had already confirmed paternity. Later, I drove us to Jennifer's parents' house. I unloaded a trunk full of gifts at Jennifer's parents' house. Her mother adored my daughter instantly, and I'm certain they welcomed my son like a grandchild. I video called my father for Christmas wishes while my extended family celebrated with him. Meanwhile, Kylie had moved in with her parents after her affair partner was ousted, and she faced job repercussions. My kids documented the day on social media, though I found little interest in it. Despite old friends reaching out, I focused on finalizing my divorce and returning to Sydney. Christmas with Jennifer's family was delightful. I surprised her with a beautiful necklace and bracelet, hinting at our future together. She was thrilled and promised to wear them often, her eyes shining with gratitude. After a hearty lunch, her father offered me a beer, and we ended up in his garage, tinkering with an old sports car. Jenny seems happier lately, Mark. Leaving Adelaide might be good for her. Are you okay with staying here? Indefinitely. I'll stick around for her, and my kids will move closer, I confirmed. How soon can you finalize the divorce? Probably a few months at most. I've been honest with Jenny. I heard she's been giving you a hard time. Yeah, it might take up to 6 months. I only had solid evidence recently, I explained. He shook his head in disgust. I've heard about this cheating mess. Why get married if you can't stay faithful? Ever heard of betrayed men? He seemed familiar with the term. Yeah, it's messed up. Jenny's ex-husband was both a cheater and an abuser. What? He laid a hand on my shoulder. She hardly knew about the cheating, but he was doing it with anyone who caught his eye. She loves you, Mark. Just don't hurt her, he said softly. I nearly destroyed her. I love her more than anything in this world. Daddy, she interjected, smiling. We've both been through pain, so we support each other. We stayed until late afternoon and my daughter drove us home. After a few drinks, Jennifer and I went to our bedroom. If the day was good, New Year's Eve was even better. I took her to a downtown hotel where we had dinner and drinks. Back in our room, champagne awaited us. Any New Year's wishes? I asked. I want us to live here together, she said. Deal. And I want you to propose as soon as your divorce is final. I'm already looking at rings, she said, holding me closer. I want a baby, she whispered. We'll start a family together, I assured her. My children left a few days later. Though reluctant to see them go, I explained I might stay in Adelaide. I told my father the same, and he promised to visit whenever possible. The following months were filled with happiness. I applied for a lease and moved in with Jennifer. Though it wasn't a fairy tale romance, it was real life, and I've never been happier. We faced the specter of my divorce and lingering trust issues, but we committed to open communication. Our bond strengthened. Being with her uplifted me. She inspired me to be a better man, and her love prompted me to buy an engagement ring before my return to Sydney. Jennifer was more nervous than I during the flight, aware of potential challenges ahead. My dad greeted us at the airport, along with my siblings and kids. We'd be staying with him during the divorce proceedings. I'd already filed the papers, but Kylie was contesting it. Surprisingly, I hadn't seen her in 12 months. I've met all the legal requirements, I stated. I've been in Adelaide for a year, and she hasn't been with me. True, but she may still argue, my lawyer replied. But no judge will entertain her claims nor mandate counseling. Is Jennifer your partner? Yes, and once the divorce is final, we'll marry and start a family, Jennifer interjected. I'll contact her lawyer, my lawyer concluded. 3 days later, my attorney said Kylie would sign, making it a joint petition if I talked to her. The case would proceed smoothly. My lawyer suggests I speak to her, I told Jennifer. You're with Jennifer now, starting a new family. Are you still angry? My dad asked. Not really. Let her have her say, then let's move forward, I assured him. The following week, we were in court. Once she signed, the judge would approve our divorce, and I'd be free. A month after the divorce decree, I hadn't seen Kylie since she left for her date. As we entered the room with my attorney, Kylie looked shocked to see me with another woman. Ignoring her, I ensured Jennifer was comfortable, holding her hand on the table while she leaned on my shoulder. Finally, I faced Kylie. To be frank, she looked terrible. I'd heard that Kylie's life had been tough since I left her. I had no sympathy for her at all. She made a choice that cost her everything. She has no contact with our daughter, and our son barely speaks to her. My whole family cut ties with her. Even her own family was disappointed but felt obliged to accept her once my father kicked her out. Speak up, Kylie, so we can finalize this divorce. I want to move on with my life. You're in the past where you belong. Who is she? She asked quietly. That's Jennifer Morris. After the divorce, I'll propose to her. She'll soon be Jennifer Williams. I'll gladly accept his proposal because I want to be his wife and the mother of his children, Jennifer added. Once she says yes, we'll plan a simple wedding. Hopefully by then she'll be pregnant. I could see the pain in Kylie's eyes. I still knew her well. You bounced back pretty fast, she observed. I wasn't the one who cheated, Kylie. I remember the evidence I found. You never gave me an explanation. I left that night, and you said nothing. You didn't fight for us. I didn't need to fight because I was your husband, so in the end you weren't worth fighting for. You betrayed me, Kylie. After 20 years together, you showed your true colors. We discussed monogamy and fidelity. I warned you that if you were like my mother, I'd leave. You made my decision easier. Do you even regret it? Don't bother answering. You don't regret it. You regret getting caught, not exposing our marriage as a sham. You're just like my mother. Her lawyer interjected. I glared at him. Back off. If you don't like it, she wants to talk. I have the right to speak too. I made a mistake. Treason isn't a mistake. It's a series of decisions. Whether he seduced you or not doesn't matter. You slept with him and lost the right to call me your husband. It was just lovemaking. And there it is, the phrase so many use to justify their actions. But for most, lovemaking means love. As my wife, it should have been me, not some idiot from work. We talked about this before we married, Kylie. I warned you what would happen if you cheated. My mother cheated too. Once I realized what you were doing, I gathered proof. Even if you said no that night, I would have left, but you disrespected me. You took all our money. No, I gave it to my father, who still owns it. He'll sell it and give me most of the money. You didn't deserve a chance. Mark, where do you live now? None of your business. Our children can choose who they spend special days with. She fell silent, knowing her words wouldn't change my mind. Just sign the papers and move on, Jennifer urged. He's moved on. We love each other and are starting a new life together. I comforted him when he needed it most. He's mine, heart and soul. I didn't mean to, she said tearfully. I still love you. Well, Mark replied coldly, that's not my concern anymore. We're going nowhere, her lawyer interjected. Just sign and end this. He's moving on. Your marriage is over. Sign and move on. He placed the papers in front of her, and she signed, tears in her eyes. Do I need to stay? I asked my attorney. No, you're free to go. You'll get the decree by mail. Then we're done, I said, rising with Jennifer and leaving the room. I'm sorry, Mark, she said. I'll always love you. Well, the apology meant little now. Those last 3 words still lingered. Yet the woman holding my hand was the one I loved, soon to be my bride in just over a month. Outside, my father, Naomi, Steve, and Charlotte awaited us at the cafe. Motioning with my head, we headed to the nearest pub. After buying a drink for each of us, we sat down, and I briefed them on the conversation. As I spoke, they perked up, realizing it was mostly me doing the talking. What did she look like? Charlotte asked. Pretty rough, definitely showing her age, Jennifer murmured in my ear. Did she sign the papers? My father inquired. Nodding, we raised our glasses and took sips. I went through something similar with your mother. I'm sure Kylie said what she needed to, just like your mother did with me. She wasn't blaming me, son. Mom was nagging you about working too hard, Stephen noted. Did she try to justify it? He asked. Yeah, the usual excuse, it was just lovemaking, I replied. What with these women claiming it was only lovemaking, Charlotte mused almost to herself. I'm committed to my husband. If I want something, I turn to him, Naomi stated, blushing as she realized her audience included her father and grandfather. We shared a laugh. Well said, girl, those are words to live by, my father praised. And if he needs a little help, he knows what to do, Naomi added. Naomi, that's my grandfather, Charlotte exclaimed. He's not dead, and neither am I. I'm 65 and still capable, Naomi retorted. Your grandfather and I promised to be faithful after our failed marriages, my father shared. I'm just relieved it's almost over, I admitted. Infidelity is unforgivable. If you were younger, maybe I'd feel trapped, Naomi reflected, glancing at my dad. But he always supported me. We stayed in Sydney a few more days, discussing plans with family. Charlotte and Tom agreed to come to Adelaide while Stephen was still deciding but likely to join us. Surprisingly, my sister offered to join us for dinner, arriving alone with news of her own broken marriage. You can stay with us while you work things out, Jennifer offered warmly. You're family now, and my family is yours too. We're selling the house here and moving to Adelaide, I chimed in. Housing prices are more reasonable there. We'll buy a big house with room for our growing family, Jennifer added, placing my hand on her stomach. I'll be carrying our first child soon. How many kids do you want, Mark? She asked. As many as you want, Jenny. I love being a dad. A month later, I received the divorce decree, marking the official end of my marriage to Kylie Daniels. I never heard from her again, but word had it she left Sydney within 6 months of our divorce. According to Stephen, who was her sole point of contact, she relocated to Queensland to make a fresh start. After that, I stopped inquiring, and Stephen ceased updating me as I no longer had any interest in her whereabouts. Just 2 days after receiving the divorce papers, I proposed to Jennifer on the beach, surrounded by our families. She could hardly speak before I slid the engagement ring onto her finger. 6 months later, we tied the knot on the same beach just a short distance from our new home. As she approached me in her wedding attire, her pregnancy was unmistakable, yet my soon-to-be wife radiated happiness as her father escorted her toward me, offering her hand. Our smiles were uncontainable as we faced the celebrant. My dear ones, we are gathered here today. Update, I'm nearing retirement, and life couldn't be sweeter. Jennifer and I have been happily married for nearly 2 decades, cherishing every moment from our first date to our wedding day. 6 months after our return to Adelaide, both my daughter and son relocated here. My daughter is happily married with 3 grandchildren, while my son and his husband have adopted 2 children. A year post-divorce, my father and Naomi moved in with us in Adelaide, where my father peacefully passed away after nearly a decade. To support Naomi, we provided her a spacious granny apartment, ensuring her independence. My sister swiftly moved in with us after her own marital woes, bringing along her children. With our help, she found stability and eventually remarried, enjoying 15 years of wedded bliss. My brother remained in Sydney and maintained a relationship with our estranged mother. At 60, we learned of her passing. Despite our distant connection, Jennifer suggested we attend her funeral, embodying our commitment to being compassionate individuals. Surprisingly, she had remarried and embraced her husband's children as her own. While they weren't unaware of our existence, they were taken aback by her reluctance to acknowledge her estrangement from 2 of her children. We refrained from explaining the reasons behind our estrangement, as funerals aren't the appropriate time. We simply paid our respects before returning home, with no remaining relatives in Sydney. Within a year, my brother relocated to Adelaide to join us. Jennifer and I expanded our family, welcoming 2 boys and 2 girls. Despite our older children's excitement about having siblings and their willingness to babysit, Jennifer and I rarely ventured out. Nevertheless, our love remained strong, our bond unbroken, and we never went to bed angry. Our lives are just as vibrant now as they were when we first came together. Reflecting on my past, especially during my divorce, some may have preferred if I had reconciled with my ex-wife. However, what would have been the point? Leaving without a word hurt her more deeply. I remained silent for a year until I returned to ensure the divorce was finalized. Fidelity was a cornerstone of our marriage, and she breached that trust. While some advocate for reconciliation, I don't believe trust can be fully restored after infidelity. Suspicion and resentment linger, often leading to eventual divorce. Instead, I chose an unconventional path. There was no desire for revenge, nor was there any hope for reconciliation. I simply moved on without Kylie, finding my true soulmate in Jennifer. I still believe our meeting in the supermarket was fateful. Though not religious, I'm reminded of old-world religions that speak of gods of fate. Are you ready, Mark? My wife, stunning in a red ball gown, interrupted my thoughts. You still have that old charm. Any news on the children? They're either on their way or getting ready to leave. And the younger ones? They'll manage fine without us for the evening unless they set the place on fire, so we have time to ourselves. Absolutely. I love you, husband. I love you, wife. Here's to many more years of happiness. I hope so. I'll let the kids know we won't be staying long. They'll understand why.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
Crispin O'Driscoll stood on the high cliff, overlooking the vast ocean of water before him. At 15, he had the hunger in him. Hunger for adventure, hunger from the strange yearnings in his body, and real hunger. Ireland, and particularly the area around Baltimore, 8 miles down the Island River from Skibbereen, was particularly hard hit. It was a time of death. It was a time of famine. He looked back at the small herd of sheep and knew he was going to have to take his uncle's offer to take him to America. There were just too many mouths to feed and not enough food. As the oldest in his family, he hated the long nights of listening to the rumbling, growling noises coming from the stomachs of his brothers and sisters, watching the surf batter the broken, rocky shore with a violence seemingly aimed at his home country. It was with a heavy heart he said goodbye to the hard life his people had fallen upon. As he shouted commands to his loyal dog, he followed the decimated herd back to the overcrowded farm. Late that night, wide awake as he awaited the early call from his father's brother, he wondered if there was a lass across the wide water that could love a homely lad such as him. With his angry red hair and profusion of freckles, he knew with a bitter self-awareness that he would never be the lad the young lasses pined over. As he finally drifted off to a land of dreams, he had a vision of the lovely Mare Kinsella and the hesitant smile she had given him at the Mass on Sunday morn. His dream was of going back to the dark-eyed beauty with her pert nose with the light scattering of freckles. He would come back with a gold ring, good clothes, and driving a fine carriage pulled by a flashy pair of blacks. Ah, the great life he and Mare would live with their stout lads to work the land and their pretty lasses to please the eyes of a man in his age. Charlie sat at her makeup mirror, musing over the stories Grandpa Driscoll had told her about Crispin O'Driscoll, the first of the family to move from Ireland during the Great Potato Famine. He had settled in the small town of Baconsburg, Ohio, and found a job as an assistant to the town smithy. Later, a few years before the railroad came and the town was renamed Cortland, Crispin had been able to take over the shop and now was the blacksmith for a wide area around the town. After Crispin settled in, he started writing to the fair lass Kinsella, and to his great pleasure, she was receptive to his hints of coming to America to be his wife. 6 months later she arrived, and the long love affair between Crispin and Mare was the talk of that part of Ohio. Through the years, the Driscolls, losing the O somewhere around the emerging 20th century, were known for 3 things: their athleticism, the carroty red hair, and a surfeit of freckles. Charlie, along with her younger sister, had inherited all 3 traits. Her mom was named after the fair maiden Mare, and she had intended to pass this name down to her youngest. Due to a mix-up in the records, Mare became Marie, and as her husband told her, "'Tis a fair name for such a lovely girl." And her name was left Marie. Thinking of her upcoming date with Jim, she knew she had to tell Jim that night what had happened in Germany with Major Tomlinson. It wasn't assault, but it sure as hell wasn't from his trying. She could see her green eyes flashing in the mirror, and she knew she had to get her anger under control before Jim arrived. She was 20 minutes early and wondered if Jim would think her too anxious if he knew she had been ready so early. With a wry smile, she wondered with some awe how quickly she had fallen for him. It had been 6 months since the Cupid killer was caught, and she and Jim had been dating regularly. Sometimes she had to nudge him a little. A typical cop, he would get wrapped up in a case and not call her for a week or so. But she knew something that Jim himself didn't know. He loved her as much as she loved him. No, he didn't exactly wear his heart on his sleeve, but it was in his eyes, his gentle touches, and certainly in his kisses. Memories of their increasingly lusty petting brought a tinge of sweat to her upper lip and a redness on her cheeks, not from rouge. That's why she had to tell him about the damn Major. She couldn't give herself to him until he knew all about her. Well, almost all. There were things she just couldn't tell him. Looking in the mirror of her compact, she saw the glow on her face that came from even thinking about consummating her relationship with Jim brought to her. And she was ready to make love with him. Men, and especially men who were cops, could be so damn dense sometimes. As she heard his car drive up, she mused on what it would be like to live with him. Hopefully there would be marriage and at some point kids. She liked being a detective, but she would drop it in a minute for a child. Maybe a red-haired imp to replace her sister. This time she would get the name right, Mare. Jim picked her up, attentive, as always, in the little things, like opening the door, that she cherished so much. Working as a cop, she had to suppress her femininity, and on her off time wanted to be treated like a lady. They were back at Coatsud, which had become their favorite restaurant. "It's nice to see you, Charlie. I have to say that black dress makes those green eyes of yours shine. I was thinking, while I was driving over, how much I missed you." She hit his arm. "Jim, we were at the courthouse all morning for Murphy's sentencing. You couldn't possibly have missed me in that short of time." He smugly smiled. "Well, I did." He took a sip of his wine and continued, "Damn, I'm glad he copped a plea bargain. I'm always afraid some shithead on the jury will let him off." "Gee, Jim, you don't have any hard feelings against jurors, do you?" Looking abashed, he responded, "No, not really. It's just that sometimes we work so hard to catch someone, and it really grates on me when they walk away. Anyway, it's a shame that we couldn't get him for the first Cupid murder. I guess that will go to the cold case file. We just don't have anything to go on." They looked up as the waiter delivered their dinner, and the conversation turned to more intimate things. As Jim was driving her home, she asked him, "I need to talk to you about something. Can you stay for a while?" When they got to her small home, Charlie went to her bedroom to slip into something more comfortable, then fixed a drink for them. "Jim, we haven't really talked about where we want this relationship to go. I think it's time we sat down and had that discussion, but not tonight." "Charlie, No, I need to tell you something. I've pulled away from you a couple of times when you wanted to become more intimate, and I know that it has hurt and even confused you. A relationship is hard enough without me sending you mixed signals. I don't like doing that. I don't want to do that. When I was stationed in Germany, I was involved in a sexual harassment case. It was eventually dismissed for lack of evidence. CID said it was just a situation of he said, she said. The key part was there were 2 other women that came forward, but they said it was too late for their cases. This is what led to me leaving the Army. I was just fed up with the bureaucratic bullshit. I'd had several dates with Gary Tomlinson, a major in the Division Public Affairs office. I'd fixed him dinner in my apartment, and afterwards we sat down to talk, both of us on the sofa. We were having a glass of German wine. He put his arm around me and drew me in for a kiss. I was okay with that, but I wasn't ready and didn't want anything more. I tried to jerk away from him, but he was too strong for me. He started ripping at my clothes. He tore off my blouse and bra and slapped me hard when I tried to push him away. He was trying to get my skirt off, and I was able to grab the bottle and hit him hard on the back of his head. He fell to the floor, almost unconscious. What I should have done was call the MPs at once. What I did was drag his sorry but out my front door. I was always fairly strong, and locked the door. I sat there frozen in fear for a long time, but I never heard anything. The next day I went to my commanding officer and filed a complaint. Since then I have this fear of intimacy. As soon as a man tries to touch me in an intimate place, I freeze up. Jim, I care a lot about you, and I want us to move our relationship to a new level. I want to do that now. My face blushed scarlet as I added, Jim, you don't know the dreams I've had about us. Jim reached over and touched her face. I didn't know, Charlie. I knew there was something, but I thought I'd just go slow. I've had the same kind of dreams. He put his strong arms around her and held her close. Charlie relaxed into his arms, closing her eyes against the wetness, struggling to make a tear. Charlie was wearing satin pajamas of a color to match the deep emerald of her eyes, with a matching robe. Jim held her tight, moving his hands up and down her back, feeling her relax. A few minutes later, he felt a change in her breathing, a slowing and deepening. He pulled his head back and saw that she was asleep. He carefully disengaged and, putting his arms under her, gently picked her up and carried her to her bed. Carefully laying her down, he turned up the covers on the other side of the bed, untied the bow on the robe, and moved over and lay her on the sheets. Reaching over to cover her, he felt her small hand on his shirt and looked down to see her eyes half open, a smokiness deepening the emerald color to the dark green of the deep ocean. He looked in her eyes, mesmerized. Then she pulled him to her and kissing him with a deep need. After a long moment, she pushed back at him and, eyes locked together, she undid the buttons to the top of her PJs. Her need now urgent. Both of them were beyond stopping now as they helped each other off with their clothes. The lovely sight before him awed Jim. Jim, I need you. Please now, take me. He whispered. I love you, Charlie. Suddenly sobbing, she pulled him down close. Her body was shaking with a different kind of passion from that of minutes previous. Jim was scared. He had thought she was ready, but now this? Darling, I'm sorry, No, Jim. It's fine. Everything is fine now. I just needed you so much. It's been so hard, loving you, wanting you but being afraid to move forward. Jim turned off the light and lay next to her. The two of them cuddled as one. They both fell into a deep sleep, Jim wakening to the smell of coffee. He looked up and saw her as a beautiful vision, face scrubbed and shining. Sitting up, he took the coffee and placed it on the nightstand. Are you okay with last night? Oh, Jim, I'm more than okay. Do you love me? Oh, I know you do. But how much? Smiling, Jim reached over and took her hand, pulling her to the bed, pulling her on top of him. How about if I show you, lady? They woke after 10 and took a leisurely shower together. Charlie prepared a picnic basket and, grabbing a couple bottles of wine, drove to Lake Mosquito and found a small meadow surrounded by trees, but mostly open to the lake. It was a hot, humid day and they ate, talked, loved, talked, drank the rest of the wine and loved. Driving back to Charlie's house, both of them sated, neither talked, just shared a loving companionship. Their love was out in the open to be shared and enjoyed. They each felt their lives were more complete. Neither had expected to feel this deeply about another person. In their respective precincts, things were fairly quiet for a few months, and neither of them had to work too much overtime. Jim did get an award for catching the Cupid killer and was promoted to detective sergeant, but he asked his new boss to keep it quiet for a couple of days. Towards the end of September, Jim took Charlie to dinner at the Coat Sud again. He was somewhat mysterious about it. He hadn't even told her where they were going. When the valet took his car, she turned to him. Okay, Jim Hartley, what's going on? Oh, I was hungry. Seemed like a good idea to get something to eat. Gosh, I hope you're hungry too. Well, yes, sure. You know I'm always hungry. The maitre d' led them into a back room with about a dozen tables and sat them at one at the far side of the room, with a nice view of the gardens which were lit at night. How come we are in a room by ourselves? Jim answered, I'm not sure. Let me ask the waiter. He stood up and walked through the door to where the waiter stood. He appeared to chat amiably with him with a bit of arm-waving and came back. Well, Charlie asked impatiently, it seems that they expect to be crowded tonight. So rather than jam us in, they put us in here so we can have some peace and quiet. He did say they might have to seat several people in here. Oh well, okay. A waiter brought a bottle of champagne and after pouring 2 glasses put the bottle in a crystal ice bucket. Charlie looked over at the bucket and saw the Waterford logo and said to herself, damn, this looks like an expensive dinner. To Jim, she asked, why the champagne? Are we celebrating something? Jim looked over at her, a serious mien on his face. Darling, every day I see you is reason enough for celebrating. As Debbie Boone so aptly put it, you light up my life. Pleased with that, Charlie just smiled. A few minutes later, a distinguished silver-haired man with an attractive brunette on his arm came in and was seated at another table. Charlie stared at the man and nudged Jim. Isn't that your boss? You know, Captain what's his name? Yeah, you're right. I'd better go over and say hi to him. Excuse me. A minute later, he waved for her to come over. Captain Adamson, this is my fiancé, Charlie Weaver. She jerked at his arm. What was he saying? They weren't engaged yet. She certainly had hopes, yes, even plans, but, Charlie, this is my boss and his lovely wife, Joanne. They chatted for a minute, then Captain said to Charlie, you have a great young man here. With his promotion, he is really going places. Huh? What promotion? She shot Jim a dirty look. Something funny was going on. A little bit later, her sister Doris and her husband Ray Hoff came in and walked over to their table. Doris kissed Jim on the cheek and then hugged Charlie. Ray shook Jim's hand and said, hey, congrats. Detective Sergeant ain't chicken feed. Then the two of them walked over and sat at the table with the police captain and his wife. Okay, Jim Hartley, what in the hell is going on? Did you really get promoted? Somewhat abashedly, he nodded and gave her a hug. Within a few minutes, both of their families and friends from both within and outside the police force came in and all congratulated Jim. Dinner proceeded, and at the end Captain Adamson walked up to a mic that had magically appeared and gave a speech chronicling Jim's achievements, especially on the Cupid case, and formally announced his promotion. After everyone clapped, Jim walked up to the mic and thanked everyone for their help. Charlie, can you come up here for a minute? Groaning, Charlie walked up and stood beside him. Without Charlie's special expertise, we never would have solved that case. I spent a lot of time with her, and we have become good friends. Charlie looked at him, aghast. the look on her face asking, what did he mean by that? Jim quickly amended, well, somewhat more than friends. Turning to Charlie, he put one knee on the floor and in the palm of his hand was magically a ring. Putting the ring on her finger, he asked, Charlie Weaver, will you marry me? Please. Almost in shock, she stared at him. Realization finally dawning, she jumped on him, squealing, yes, yes. Oh God, yes, Jim. That night, Jim was told he had been a very bad boy but was treated like he had been very, very good. After some discussion, they decided they wanted to be married on Valentine's Day of the next year. It would be fitting, Charlie insisted. Her sister, Doris, jumped in and started helping with the planning. A month after proposing, Jim moved in with Charlie. The plan was to stay there and save money for a larger house they hoped they would need later. Their love was expressed frequently, and it was mutually satisfying. They were both open to finding out what would give the other satisfaction and took joy from each other's happiness. Finally, the time of the wedding came. Jim moved into one of the local hotels for the several days before the wedding. On Valentine's Day, at 1:30 in the morning, Jim's phone in the hotel room rang. Jim, is that you? Recognizing her voice, he asked, what's wrong, honey? You sound upset. Jim, I have to come down there. I'll be there in about 20 minutes. Wait, Charlie. I thought I was supposed to stay away from you today. I'll be there in a few minutes. If I don't talk to you, there won't be a wedding. Jim hung up and stood looking at the phone in a dazed shock. Not too much later, there was a soft knock on the door. Jim opened the door with some trepidation. Charlie stood there with tears running down her face and no makeup on. She looked like hell. Charlie, what? Do you have some brandy? I need something to let me get through this. Jim looked in the minibar and found 4 small bottles of Courvoisier. He poured one in a glass for her. What's going on, Angel? You sit in that chair and I'll sit in this one. Just listen. Please, if you love me, let me get through this. Then if you still love me, well, Jim, a very scared Jim, nodded at her to go ahead and tell him whatever she had to say. When Marie died of the drug overdose, I was in the hospital in Germany from a car crash. Not being able to go to her funeral, to say goodbye to her was hard on me. You can understand that, can't you? Jim nodded but didn't say anything. So I internalized everything. I came to believe that I owed her something, that whoever was responsible for giving her the drugs should have to pay. I wasn't totally honest about why I joined the police force. Part of the reason was to be more able to look at police files. I started investigating, going over the files, talking to anyone that might have some information. I talked a lot with my sister, Doris, since she was closer to what happened than I was. She did some work on her own to find the man with the drugs. I talked to her about everything, and together we came up with a name. I looked into it more and satisfied myself that this man was the guilty one. And so the first Cupid killing happened. I tracked him for weeks and saw him. I have a cigar box of photos. Well, he gave drugs to kids and vulnerable people for free to get them hooked. I saw the lives he ruined. I saw how he had ruined Marie's life. I started planning. I knew in general how to get away with it, but I didn't want to take any chances that something would go wrong. As it turned out, I only made one mistake. I told Doris everything I found out. She knew all my plans. Could I have another brandy? And a glass of water? Numb. Jim acceded to her requests, saying nothing. I looked at every detail. I made alternative plans, and I made contingency plans. Finally, I was ready to go. I reviewed everything with my sister, and she couldn't find any fault with it. Finally, on the night I chose, I got there a half hour later than I had planned because I'd received a tip that the target had a party to stop at. I had my parking spot all selected, and when I got there I saw Doris' car. I hurried up the back way of the building which had accidentally been left unlocked. When I came out on the roof, I could see someone standing at the parapet with bow in hand. I crept closer and I could see the bow string being pulled back. Taking a chance, I whispered with a voice that would carry, "Doris, don't." It was Doris, and she was able to stop the shot. I argued with her to go home and take care of her family, that maybe this wasn't such a good thing to do. She left. I told her I'd check and make sure nothing was left behind, and waited until I knew for sure she was gone. I edged over to the wall and saw the target standing there. I'd brought my favorite bow with me, and without thinking I shot the arrow at his throat. I knew from shooting thousands and thousands of arrows where it went, so I didn't stop to see what happened. I left and went home. I killed that damn drug dealer, and I don't feel a bit bad about it. I know I might have lost your love, but I couldn't marry you without telling. Jim sat there staring at her, putting things together, remembering little things, small niggles of suspicions, reactions, etc. He looked at her, and she had a small, sad smile on her face. What? Jim asked. She handed Jim one of the small plastic-coated cards they used to read from to give the Miranda warning. "You'd better use this in case I say something from here on that you might want to use as evidence against me." Damn, Jim thought. A stupid rookie mistake. But then he thought about the big picture. The wedding in a few hours, how much he loved her, what was important in life. Jim took her hand and led her to the bed. They crawled under the covers and fell into a deep sleep. At least Charlie did. Jim lay there, wide awake, thinking, "Why did you tell me, Charlie? Damn, I wish you hadn't." The next day the wedding went off as planned and everyone migrated over to the hall where the reception was. Jim seemed to drink more than normal, but hell, it was a wedding. When Jim was pretty close to 3 sheets to the wind on late evening of Valentine's Day, he found himself dancing with Doris. "Jim, when you have a chance, I have a small confession to make to you." Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Wife contracts STD and ends up in hospital after infidelity with her boss is exposed. It was barely 8:45 a.m., but this Monday was already shaping up to be the worst one I'd ever had. I'd kissed my wife Marissa goodbye earlier that morning. She's been my partner for 15 years and is an incredibly successful real estate agent, judging by her impressive stack of commissions and bonuses. "You have a good day," she chimed in that overly polished realtor voice she knew I couldn't stand. Her smirk suggested she was holding back a secret, which only added to my irritation. On my way to the office, I couldn't stop thinking about the heap of reports due by the end of the month. I got in at my usual time, 7:45, dropped off my briefcase, and headed to the men's room for a quick coffee break. That's when everything went sideways. While at the office, I was suddenly overwhelmed by a sharp pain at the welcome, prompting a loud scream. My boss, Alan Randall, quickly came to assist, expressing deep concern. I described the burning sensation, and we both noticed the alarming greenish discharge. Alan immediately advised me to seek medical attention and reassured me not to worry about the pending reports, promising to handle them and suggesting I take the necessary time off. Grateful, I thanked him for his understanding and support, appreciating his compassionate approach during such a distressing moment. I splashed water on my face, grabbed my briefcase, and headed out the door. I told the receptionist I wouldn't be back for at least a day, maybe longer. Normally, I'd see my regular doctor, but his office was clear across town, and I doubted I'd get an appointment today. Instead, I opted for the urgent care just a few blocks from my office. Once there, they quickly took some samples and directed me to the waiting room. It felt like hours, but only 30 minutes passed before a nurse called out sharply, "Greg Watson." She gestured for me to come over with a look that made me feel less than human. Curious about her demeanor, I followed her to the observation room. "Have a seat, Mr. Watson," she instructed coldly. I sat down and watched as she took my vitals, blood pressure, temperature, the works, without much conversation. After jotting down the details, she mentioned, "The doctor will see you shortly," and left the room. Not long after, there was a knock on the door, and an older man in a white coat entered, holding a folder. "Mr. Watson, I'm Dr. Smith," he introduced himself. Sitting down, he opened the folder and didn't mince words. "Your tests show you have gonorrhea." I repeated, stunned. "Gonorrhea?" "Yes, it's a sexually transmitted disease," Dr. Smith said, giving me a look that suggested I should have known better. "I'll prescribe an antibiotic and you should avoid any sexual activity for at least 7 days. After you finish your treatment, if you still have symptoms, see your primary doctor." The news hit me like a truck, but Dr. Smith's straightforward manner helped cut through the shock. I nodded, processing the steps I needed to take next. He started by saying that other tests were ongoing and it could take a couple of weeks or more to get my results. He then asked for a list of people I'd recently been in contact with. "I've only been intimate with one person in my entire life," I told him. "My wife." He gave me a sad look for a moment before checking my chart. "If I got it from her, wouldn't she show symptoms?" I asked. "Not necessarily, Mr. Watson," he replied. "She might confuse them for something like a bladder or vaginal infection. It's important she gets checked soon. Waiting could lead to serious complications." "Excuse me, Mr. Watson," he said, handing me some medication and having me sign a few forms. "Take care of yourself, Mr. Watson, and make sure to follow up with your doctor," he advised as he left. Feeling a mix of emotions, I finished up and headed to my car. I called my boss to update him. "I'm sorry to hear that, Greg," Alan said. "Don't worry, your privacy is my priority. You'll take a leave and return when you're ready. I've taken care of your reports, so just focus on getting better." "Thank you," I replied, ending the call. Next, I had to talk to my parents, whom I never hid anything from. I hit their speed dial and my dad answered. "Hey son, are you at work?" he asked. No, Dad, I'm dealing with a health issue and need to talk with you and Mom, I said. Of course, he replied. Are the kids okay? They're fine, I assured him, but I'd rather not discuss this over the phone. Come over then. We'll have coffee and talk, he suggested. We hung up, and I put away my phone, ready to face the next conversation. I should tell you a bit about my background. My sister Denise and I were raised in a very religious and loving family. Our childhood was filled with laughter and love, and although our parents were very much in love, they were also quite strict. One of the key rules in our house was no sex before marriage. Because of this upbringing, I didn't have sex until I married Marissa. While we were dating, I told her I wanted to wait until marriage. She responded with a big smile and a deep kiss, saying, "That's so sweet. I promise I'll rock your world on our wedding night." And she certainly did. It was an incredible experience, and she was patient and loving as she showed me how to make love in a way that pleased her. Eventually, I began to really enjoy our intimacy, and it seemed she did too. Marissa had been with others before me, but that didn't bother me as long as she was committed to our relationship. Not long after we married, she took a job at a busy real estate office while working towards her license. Our first daughter, Lisa, was born about a year into our marriage, followed by Ginger a year later. Marissa decided to have her tubes tied after Ginger's. Tough delivery, feeling that 2 children were enough. While I had hoped for a son, I couldn't have been happier with my daughters. Both became the light of my life, quickly turning me into a doting father. When Marissa went back to work after her maternity leave, I often found myself playing the role of Mr. Mom, especially when she worked late or had paperwork to catch up on. As the girls grew, I took them to their various activities, Lisa with her music lessons and Ginger with her sports, particularly when Marissa's work took her away in the evening. Over time, though, Marissa started to be away even more frequently, attending seminars and company retreats, sometimes over weekends or for an entire week. She always made sure to call us every night, but the increasing distance was hard. On top of everything, she developed an irritating fake persona that really got under my skin. I brought it up more than once, but she seemed committed to it. Her attitude toward work had shifted too, and I started to wonder if she was spending too much time there. Even our daughters began to notice the changes in their mom. Despite these issues, the thought of her being unfaithful never crossed my mind. She knew my strong stance on infidelity. One day I arrived at my parents' house and pulled into the driveway. My dad greeted me at the door with a warm hug and a pat on the shoulder. "We just finished the coffee. Come on in, and we'll make some more and talk," he invited. I walked into the dining room and gave my mom a hug before we sat down at the table. She poured us coffee and I added cream and butter pecan syrup to mine. Dad did the same, and we each took a sip. "Why don't we start with a prayer?" Dad suggested. Of course, I agreed. It was their way, prayer first, then conversation. After a few minutes of prayer, we got down to business. "What's wrong, son?" Dad asked. "I just came from the urgent care clinic." "I have gonorrhea," I said. "Oh my God," Dad responded quietly, always composed as long as he heard the truth. "Were you fooling around?" he asked after a pause. "No, Dad, never," I assured him. "Marissa is the only woman I've ever been with." He nodded. "I believe you, son. I just needed to hear you say it. What are you planning to do?" Mom chimed in. "I don't see any other option but to divorce her," I admitted. "It's going to be tough on the girls. They're old enough to understand," I added. "I can't just overlook this. Even if she promises it won't happen again, I can't trust her." "Do you know how long this has been going on?" Dad asked. "I just found out this morning," I replied. "Adultery is a clear ground for divorce," Dad said, getting up to go to his office. Mom looked heartbroken. "I'm so sorry this is happening, Greg," she said. "I always thought Marissa was such a wonderful woman." "Me too, Mom. It seems she fooled us all." Dad returned with his Rolodex, flipping through until he found a particular card. "There she is," he said. "You know Gina Hawkins, the family law attorney from our church?" I asked. "Yes, that's her." "Let me give her a call," he said. It wasn't surprising he had her card. As a deacon, Dad kept contacts from the congregation handy. He dialed and spoke to Gina's secretary before getting through to her. "Gina, hi, it's Dan Watson. Yes, from the church. Listen, I'm calling because my son could really use your help soon. He's facing a tough situation, and I think you could assist." "Oh, really? This afternoon at 12:30? That's perfect. I'll make sure he gets there." "Thanks so much, Gina." "I owe you one. Take care, and give your little one a big hug from us." "Okay, bye." After hanging up, Dad turned to me. "That was Gina. She can see you today at 12:30 thanks to a canceled appointment. Make sure you bring your financials and tax returns from the last 2 years," he informed me. "Okay," I said, realizing I needed to get my documents ready. "I guess I'd better head inside and pack my things." That sounds like a good plan, Dad replied. And you know you have to talk to Marissa about the STD. She needs to get tested as well to prevent any further spread. Maybe the girls should stay with us for a bit, Mom suggested. Things might get tense at home with everything going on. You're right, Dad agreed. Have them stay a few days until things calm down. Look, son, why don't you bring the girls over after school? We'll take care of getting them to school on time. I will. Thanks, Dad, I said. We chatted a bit more before I got up to leave. Dad hugged me at the door. It'll work out, son, he reassured me. Just don't do anything rash. I know you're hurt and might want revenge on Marissa, but remember Romans 12:19, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. Don't make me bail you out of jail. Think about your girls. I grinned. No problem, Dad. I got it. I got back in my car and headed home. Dad was right about one thing. I did want revenge on Marissa and whoever else was involved. After over 15 years of loving her exclusively, this felt like the ultimate betrayal. When I arrived home, I started going through my files to find my old tax returns. I also needed to find Marissa's because about 8 years ago, she had suggested we file taxes separately to save money. Back then, it made sense, but when I looked at her tax forms, I discovered the real reason she wanted us to file separately. Marissa had earned much more in bonuses and commissions than I had realized. Seeing how much she had put into our joint bank account, I wondered where all her extra money had gone. My search led me to a folder full of bank statements from a bank I didn't recognize. The latest statement showed she had saved almost $1 million over the past 8 years. What was her plan, I wondered? Was this some kind of plan for when the kids went to college? I collected the statements and her tax forms, put them in my folder, and went to my car. Just as I was about to leave, my phone beeped with a text from Marissa. She said she would be late because of a showing and not to wait for dinner. Yeah, sure, I said to myself. I replied, no problem, see you when you get home. As I sent the message, I couldn't help but wonder if she noticed that I didn't say I love you like I usually do. I arrived at Gina Hawkins' office building, parked the car, and headed to her suite. As I walked in, I was greeted by an attractive blonde receptionist. I'm here to see Gina Hawkins, I told her. I have an appointment for 12:30. After a quick check on her computer, she smiled and led me to Gina's office. Gina stood to greet me, shaking my hand warmly. It's good to see you, Greg, she said, smiling. Would you like some coffee? That would be great, thanks, I replied. Gina turned to the receptionist. Could you bring 2 cups of coffee, please, and maybe some butter and nuts? Sure, the receptionist replied before leaving the room. She returned shortly with 2 cups and some butter portions. Gina motioned for me to sit, and I took a seat across from her. I was surprised to get a call from your father this morning, Gina began. So you're facing a problem that needs legal attention? Yeah, it looks like Marissa's been unfaithful, I said. I'm sorry to hear that, Gina responded, her expression sympathetic. I always thought you two were solid. So did I, but I guess I was wrong, I said. Can you tell me about my options? I explained the situation, including my visit to the clinic and the discovery of the bank statements earlier that day. Gina nodded thoughtfully. I understand how tough this must be, she said. Let me explain a bit about how divorce works here. It's not necessarily about justice, it often comes down to finances. In this state, we have no-fault divorce laws, but you can still file on grounds of adultery if you have strong evidence. What about the STD she gave me? I asked. Gina nodded. That's a strong point, she acknowledged, but her lawyer might claim you caught it from someone else. We know that's not true, but we need to convince a judge. Regarding the money she set aside, she could argue it was meant as a surprise for retirement. You don't really believe that, do you? I questioned. No, it seems more like an exit strategy, Gina replied. She's probably waiting for an opportune time, maybe after your daughters finish school, to leave without complications. Proving that in court, though, will be difficult. So I'm just out of luck, I pressed. Not necessarily, Gina reassured me. I can hire a private detective to investigate. It's pricey, but it could provide the solid evidence we need in court. Would you like to proceed with that? Yes, let's go ahead, I decided. Great, Gina responded. I'll need all the details you can provide, her car's make and model, license plate number, places she frequents. I pulled out my phone. Actually, I installed a phone tracker app when she lost her phone a few months back. Oh, let me check if it's still active. I opened the app and located her phone at a house on the north side of town. I showed Gina the address. Perfect, she said, jotting it down. I'll get in touch with my investigator right now. She made the call, giving the investigator all the details we had. After hanging up, she looked at me with a determined expression. We'll handle this as discreetly as possible, she assured me. Okay, we're all set. If there's something going on, we'll find out soon enough. Now, let's focus on your situation. You have two teenage daughters, Lisa and Ginger, ages 14 and 13, correct? Gina asked. Yes, that's right. They're not quite old enough to choose which parent they want to live with, but it's getting close. I want to seek custody, I confirmed. Understood, Gina nodded. You should know that courts typically favor the mother for primary custody. However, we can certainly make a case for you, especially given the circumstances. Who's been the main caretaker? Marissa often goes out in the evenings, so I've been the one at home, I explained. Got it. And just to clarify, are you certain the girls are biologically yours? She inquired cautiously. I believe so, yes. At this point, does it matter? My name is on their birth certificates and I've raised them since they were babies, I replied a bit defensively. I understand, Gina reassured me, but it might be good to know for sure. I can refer you to a lab for a paternity test if you'd like. Okay, I'll think about that, I said. What about the house situation? We don't have a mortgage. The house was my grandparents' and now it's in a family trust under my parents' names. They let us live there, I explained. Good, that simplifies things a bit. No mortgage issues to deal with, she noted. There will still be personal property and possibly other assets to consider dividing. I'll prepare a list of what you need to address. Is there anything else I need to do right now? I asked. Not at this moment, she replied. I'll start drafting the paperwork, but let's wait to see what the private investigator finds before we proceed too far. However, go ahead and complete the checklist I give you. Do you think I should confront her about this personally? I wondered aloud, but it might be wise to at least inform her that she needs to get tested for STDs to prevent any further spread. It's important for both your sakes, Gina advised. That makes sense, I agreed. After finalizing the paperwork, Gina handed me a checklist and a card with the lab's contact information. Anything else I should know? I asked. That's all for now, she replied. Go ahead and handle these tasks. We'll inform you if we receive any updates from the investigator. For any questions about the fees, please speak to my secretary. And Greg, yes? Yes, I responded. Don't do anything rash. We'll get through this together. It won't be easy, but things will improve. I understand, I said, appreciating her support. Thanks for everything. You're welcome, she responded. We'll keep in touch. With that, I left her office, wrote a check for her services, and drove to the lab. After picking up the test kit, I stopped by the bank to verify some of the details Gina had mentioned. Then I headed home. This might have been a moment for some to drown their sorrows in alcohol, reflecting on the misery of their situation, but that's not me. I've never been a drinker, another one of those rules I grew up with. My parents didn't drink, and neither did I. Instead, I made myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table. Just as the coffee was ready, my two daughters burst through the door. They usually came home around this time, taking the bus. Normally, they wouldn't see me until later, but today was different. Daddy, you're home, Lisa greeted me with surprise. Are you okay? Yes, Daddy, why are you home so early? Ginger chimed in. It's been a pretty hectic day, I explained. Listen, could you two pack some things for a few days? You're going to stay with your grandparents for a while. Why, Daddy? Ginger's voice was laced with concern. What's going on? Is something wrong with Mom? Did you guys have a fight? Well, yes, something is wrong, but your mom and I haven't had a fight. That might happen later, I said, trying to keep the conversation as light as possible. You caught her cheating, didn't you? Lisa's question caught me off guard. I was taken aback. What makes you think that? I asked. She looked down, slightly embarrassed. I've heard her on the phone a couple of times, she confessed. She was using that fake voice she does, you know, the one that annoys you. I nodded, encouraging her to continue. It was something like, I can't wait to see you again, love, and then she giggled. Not like herself at all. It sounded very personal. I'm sorry I didn't say anything sooner. I know you don't like gossip, she added. It's all right, I reassured her, giving her a hug. Lisa then added, she's been acting really strange lately. It's like she doesn't really want to talk to us much anymore. Do you feel that way too, Ginger? I asked, turning to my younger daughter. She nodded. Yeah, like she doesn't want us bothering her. I gave them both a reassuring hug. You can bother me any time, I smiled. But right now I need to swab your cheeks for a test. Cheek swab? Ginger inquired, eyeing the test kit. Yes, I confirmed. My lawyer thinks we should do a DNA test. You don't think we're really your kids? Lisa asked, a hint of worry in her voice. I know you're my kids, I reassured her. But we just need to confirm everything legally. So you're getting a divorce? Lisa asked directly. It looks like it, I acknowledged. Isn't there any way you could forgive her? Ginger wondered softly. I don't think so, I replied. She made a mistake that's pretty serious. I had to see a doctor about it this morning. Lisa gasped, almost slipping out a swear word. Sorry, she muttered. It's okay, I assured her with a weak smile. I felt like swearing today too. Now let's get these samples done. I swabbed the inside of Lisa's cheek gently, then did the same for Ginger. Once their samples were secured in the kit, I took a swab from my own cheek and placed it into a separate vial. Okay, you two head upstairs and pack enough for a couple of nights. We need to be ready to leave in 15 minutes. And don't forget your homework, I instructed. As the girls went to their rooms to gather their things, I organized the DNA test kit. My plan was to drop the kids off at their grandparents' house and then take the kit to the lab. As we drove, Lisa asked, Daddy, if you get divorced, can I stay with you? Yeah, me too, Ginger chimed in. I hope so, girls, I responded. I'm going to ask for custody, but you need to understand that courts often favor the mother. I don't want to stay with her, Lisa confessed. Right now, I hate her for what she did to us. I thought about encouraging her not to hate her mother, but I held back. She was voicing feelings that were all too familiar to me. I understand how you feel, sweetheart, I assured her. Just remember, no matter what happens, I love you both immensely, and I'll always be there for you. I love you too, Daddy, Lisa said, tears streaming down her cheeks. Her tears made my resolve even stronger, fueled by my anger towards Marissa. In my mind, I vowed retribution. Vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. My father's words echoed in my head, calming my vengeful thoughts. We arrived at my parents' house and pulled into the driveway. I hugged and kissed both girls, promising to call them later. We were met at the porch by my dad, who hugged the girls as they carried their bags inside. Mom came out to greet us too. I'd better get to the lab before it's too late, I said after a few moments. Are you okay? My dad asked, concern evident in his voice. As fine as I can be under the circumstances, I replied. We'll pray for you, he said. Give us a call and let us know how things go with Marissa, he added. I will, but I'm not sure when that will be, I replied. It's okay, son, Mom reassured me. You can call any time. Thanks, I said, giving her a hug. I'd better head off now. I left, feeling a mix of support from my family and the heavy burden of the steps I needed to take next. I got back in my car and headed to the lab, arriving about 30 minutes before they closed. I handed the DNA test kit to the receptionist. How soon can I expect the results? I inquired. We should have them ready by the end of the week, she replied with a reassuring smile. Great, thanks, I said and left for home. Along the way, I felt the need to talk to someone who might shed more light on Marissa's behavior. I decided to call her sister, Loretta. I connected my Bluetooth earpiece and dialed her number. She picked up after the second ring. Hey Greg, how's my favorite brother-in-law? Loretta greeted cheerfully. I've had better days, I replied. Do you have a minute to talk? Of course, she responded. What's going on? Have you spoken to Marissa recently? Not since the family gathering last month at your place, I said. Actually, things aren't great. I briefly explained the situation, keeping the details succinct yet clear. Oh my God, Loretta gasped after I finished. Greg, I hate to say this, but it seems like she's fallen back into old patterns. Old patterns? I echoed, puzzled. Loretta hesitated before continuing. Marissa was quite wild in her younger days. She went through relationships rapidly, almost as fast as changing clothes. She wasn't faithful to anyone she dated during high school and college. I thought she had changed after meeting you. She even told me she had found her soulmate and was done with her old ways. I didn't think it was necessary to bring it up before. I appreciate that, but I wish I had known, I admitted. I'm sorry, Greg. I should have told you, she said. It's okay, Loretta. It's not your fault, I assured her, trying to keep my emotions in check. Listen, I understand you're planning to have her move out. I'm calling to see if she could possibly stay with you for a while, I said, getting to the point. Actually, yes, I added, if that's okay with you. I heard Loretta sigh on the other end of the phone. She might stay here for a bit until she sorts herself out, she said. Frank won't be thrilled, though. I don't want to cause any trouble for you guys, I responded, concerned. It's okay, he'll manage, just as long as it's not for too long, she reassured me. Thanks, I appreciate it. I'm not sure when she'll be home tonight, but I'll give you a call when she's on her way to you, I said. Thank you, Loretta replied. How did the girls handle everything? They're upset, but they're handling it better than I expected, I answered. You've raised strong young women, Greg. Stay strong for them, she encouraged. I'm trying, I said. I need to go make dinner now. We'll talk later, okay? I will, I promised, and then we ended the call. Back home, I warmed up some leftover meatloaf for dinner. Just as I finished eating, the phone rang again. It was Gina, my lawyer. I glanced at the clock. It was just past 6:30 p.m. Hey, I greeted her. Working late tonight? I asked for you, yes, Gina replied. I've received some preliminary findings from the private investigator. It appears Marissa has been quite active. She's met with 3 men since this afternoon. I was stunned. 3 men in one day? How does she even find the time? Yes, Gina confirmed. I'm sending over the details now, photos, videos, and a summary of the report. I'd advise against watching the video, but you should definitely listen to the last few minutes of the audio. It's quite revealing. So, do you think you have enough to proceed with the divorce? Absolutely, I affirmed. Good. Listen to that audio and then call me, she instructed. Will do. Thanks, Gina, I said, hanging up, feeling a mix of anger and relief that I was finally moving forward. I booted up my laptop and accessed my email. I found the video Gina mentioned and fast-forwarded to the specific part she had highlighted. Although I had no interest in watching Marissa in such a compromising situation, I was compelled to understand the context of their conversation. I see you're married, the man remarked, noting her rings. For the moment, Marissa replied casually. I noticed you're married too, she observed, glancing at his ring. Yes, my wife and I have an open relationship, he explained. And you? It's not open in that sense, but I take my freedoms as they come, she stated. So your husband doesn't know? He probed. No, he doesn't, she confessed. He has no idea what kind of person he's married to, I thought bitterly. Now I'm realizing the truth. What's the matter? Isn't he good to you at home? The man asked, digging deeper. He had better be. I taught him everything he knows, she boasted. You taught him? The man seemed surprised. Was he inexperienced when you married? Believe it or not, he was a 23-year-old virgin, she divulged. He's quite religious, doesn't smoke, drink, or even curse. He'd probably have a fit if I swore around him. He didn't even know how to make love until we were married. Damn, the man reacted. Sounds like you think he's a loser. So why stay with him? Is there love? In some way, I suppose. He's a good father, looks after our girls well, and doesn't complain when I come home late. But beyond that, he's dull, she admitted. Are the girls even his? He asked curiously. She shrugged nonchalantly. Honestly, I don't know. Maybe. It doesn't matter much to me. He believes they're his, and that's what counts, she claimed. How long have you been fooling around? He inquired. I don't mind saying, she replied breezily. I've been having my fun throughout our marriage, and he's still clueless. He has no idea, hasn't been with anyone else, so how would he know any different? Is that it? He asked. That's it, she confirmed. Hearing her dismiss our life and our family so flippantly devastated me. The depth of her deceit was far worse than I had imagined. At that moment, I had to hold back from throwing up. It made me feel sick to think that she'd been treating me like this throughout our entire marriage. Do you plan to stick with him? Yeah, for now. At least until the girls finish high school and head to college, she said. That's in about 4 or 5 years. I'll have everything ready to leave by then. Why wait? Because usually the courts give custody to the mom, and the last thing I want is to end up with 2 teenage girls on my hands. She said, What are you going to do after this? I want to party. Maybe hang out with a few people at once. Maybe go on a cruise or retire to Costa Rica or something. I'm not sure, she said. Oh, I've got a couple of guys. Can you sneak away for the weekend? He asked. Sure, she said. I can tell Greg I have a mandatory weekend seminar or something. He'll believe anything I say. Let me know when you can leave and we'll arrange it. You have my number? I will, she said, smiling. He checked his watch. It's getting late and I need to go. I can't wait to see you again, honey. I'm excited too, she said. He left, and Marissa sat on the bed with a big grin. Oh, Greg, she said to the empty room. You have no idea what's coming. After watching the video, I sat there, stunned, wiping away tears. The depth of Marissa's betrayal hit me harder than I'd anticipated. With a heavy sigh, I dialed Gina. I just finished watching the video, I told her. You were right. It was enlightening. Gina's response was prompt. What's your next move? Burn it to the ground, I replied, my voice steady. Consider it done, she affirmed. And what about the men she was with? Is there anything we can do about them? I inquired, though part of me dreaded the answer. Unfortunately, no, Gina explained. Alienation of affection lawsuits aren't recognized in the state anymore. I paused, a bitter chuckle escaping me. Don't worry, their own circumstances will catch up with them soon enough. Echoing my father's earlier words, I murmured, Vengeance is mine, I will repay. Gina chuckled softly. Well, I need to get going, she said. I'll start preparing the divorce papers and get everything in order. If Marissa plans to run, we'll make sure it's not on her terms. Thanks, Gina, I really owe you for this, I said gratefully. Just take good care of your girls, she advised. With our conversation over, I leaned back on the couch, tears streaming down my cheeks. 15 years of my life given to someone who had so little regard for our family, the pain was almost unbearable. A few minutes after hanging up with Gina, my phone buzzed. It was Marissa calling. "Hi," I answered. "Hi, Greg," she responded. "Are you okay?" "It's been a tough day," I admitted. "What's up with you?" "I'm just wrapping up at work." "I think I closed another sale," she said, sounding upbeat. "That's good," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "I'll be home soon, so I'll see you in about half an hour, okay?" "Sure," I agreed. "Okay, I'll see you then. Love you," she said, her voice taking on that unnervingly insincere tone. "Me too," I responded and hung up. I wondered briefly if she noticed my lack of an "I love you" in return, but then realized it no longer mattered to me whether she did or not. I gathered the evidence I had printed earlier, 4 photos of Marissa with other men, all on a single sheet, and placed them in a folder. I arranged the folder on the kitchen table, where I planned to confront her when she arrived home. With everything set, I brewed a cup of coffee and sat down to wait. As the clock ticked past 1 hour, then 2, Marissa still hadn't come home. Concern mingled with frustration. I figured she might be delaying her return deliberately, but as more time passed without any word from her, worry crept in. I tried calling her cell phone, only to be directed to voicemail. I left a message and followed up with a text, but there was no reply. 3 hours after our call and still no sign of her, I began to fear something more serious might have happened, like an accident. Almost 3.5 hours after Marissa was supposed to be home, my home phone rang. I hurried to answer it, hoping it was her, but it wasn't. "Greg Watson," I answered. "Mr. Watson, this is Angela Barnes from Mercy Hospital. Are you related to Marissa Watson?" "She's my wife," I responded, my heart sinking. "Mr. Watson, your wife was in an accident and has been brought here for treatment. Can you come as soon as possible?" "Yes, of course," I said anxiously. "Is she okay? What happened?" "I'm sorry, sir, I can't provide any details," Angela replied. "Her doctor will speak with you when you arrive. Please come to the courtesy desk and they will direct you from there." "Thank you," I said, trying to keep my composure. After hanging up, I stuffed the envelope with the pictures into my jacket pocket. I considered calling Dad or Loretta for support, but decided to wait until I knew more. I drove to the hospital with a heavy heart, parked quickly, and hurried inside. At the courtesy desk, I introduced myself. "I'm Greg Watson, here to see Marissa Watson," I told the middle-aged woman behind the counter. She looked up Marissa's information and then nodded to another staff member. "Would you please take Mr. Watson to the ICU?" she instructed. The woman came around the desk and gestured for me to follow. We walked in silence to the ICU, where a police officer was waiting. "Mr. Watson?" he asked as we approached. "That's me," I confirmed. "I'm Officer Simpson. I responded to your wife's accident," he explained. "She was driving through the intersection of 3rd and Main when a drunk driver ran a red light and hit her car on the driver's side." My heart ached at the details. "I'm very sorry," he added, his tone sincere. "It's okay," I managed to say, although nothing felt okay. "Her car was towed to the junkyard," he continued. "There's not much left of it." He handed me a business card from the tow truck company. "If there's anything I can do to help, please give me a call." "Thank you, officer," I said, accepting the card. My mind raced with worry as I prepared to see Marissa, unsure of what awaited me. When the officer left, a man in a white medical coat approached me. "Greg Watson?" he inquired. "Yes," I replied. "I'm Dr. Blake, the doctor overseeing your wife's treatment. Can we talk for a moment?" "Of course," I responded. He led me to a small room, closed the door, and sat across from me at a round table. "How is my wife?" I asked immediately. "She has multiple broken bones and several internal injuries. Additionally, she suffered a severe blow to the head. We've placed her in a medically induced coma to aid her recovery," he explained. I nodded, bracing for more. "Is there anything else?" "Yes, there is more concerning news. Our preliminary tests suggest that she may be HIV positive. We've sent samples for more detailed blood tests, but it will take some time to confirm," Dr. Blake continued. I felt a cold wave of shock. "I found out this morning she has gonorrhea," I shared, still processing the news. "And are you receiving treatment for that?" he asked. "Yes," I confirmed. "That's good to hear. However, I recommend you get tested for HIV as soon as possible. If you could see your primary care doctor tomorrow, that would be best. It's important to know your status," he advised. I nodded, absorbing his recommendations. "How long will she be in the coma?" I asked, shifting the topic back to Marissa. "It depends on her progress, but it could be anywhere from 10 days to 2 weeks. After that, her stay here may extend depending on her recovery speed," he explained. "Can I see her now?" I asked, eager yet anxious. "Absolutely," Dr. Blake said, standing. She needs your support now more than ever." He led me to the door and pointed down the hall. "She's in room 5, just over there." "Thank you, doctor," I said, shaking his hand before walking to Marissa's room, my mind racing with everything I had just learned. I walked into Marissa's hospital room, and the sight of her struck me hard. She was swathed in bandages, with one leg encased in a cast that extended to her hip. Her face was bruised and swollen, stitched cuts marring her skin. She looked as though she had barely survived a brutal battle. Silently, I said a prayer for her, then took off my wedding ring. I pulled out the envelope containing the photos, wrote her name on it, and placed my ring inside before sealing it. Turning to the nurse who was attentively monitoring Marissa, I held out the envelope. "Could you make sure she gets this when she wakes up?" I asked. "Of course," the nurse replied warmly. "You can place it on that tray over there," she suggested, pointing to a nearby wheeled tray. "Thank you," I said, setting the envelope on the tray to ensure Marissa would see it upon awakening. I lingered for a moment, looking down at Marissa. Despite everything, it pained me to see her in such a state. Noticing she was still wearing her wedding rings, I gently removed them and pocketed them. "Goodbye, Marissa," I whispered. "I'll see you later." With a nod to the nurse, who offered me a sympathetic smile, I left the room. Driving home, I called Loretta to update her on the situation. She was stunned by the news, especially the complications with Marissa's health. "Greg, you know Frank won't be comfortable with her staying here if she's HIV positive," Loretta stated, her voice filled with concern. "He's worried about the kids, and I can't argue with him on that." Her parents had moved to Florida in retirement, eliminating another potential support option. "Then it seems I'll need to find her an apartment," I concluded. "I think that's wise," Loretta agreed. "I'm sorry, Greg, but I have to prioritize my family. She's made her choices. I can help move her belongings, but after that, I need to step back." "I understand," I reassured her. "You're doing what you need to do." "It's late, and I need to get some sleep, but please keep me posted," she said. "I will," I promised. "Thanks for everything, Loretta." Hanging up, I felt the weight of the day settling over me as I drove the rest of the way home in silence. It was close to midnight when I finally reached home. Exhausted from the day's events, I quickly undressed and fell into bed, asleep almost the moment my head hit the pillow. The next morning, I woke up feeling the weight of everything that had happened. I called my doctor's office and was surprised to find they could fit me in for an appointment later that morning. After securing my appointment, I called my parents to update them on Marissa's situation. They were understandably shocked, particularly about the possibility of her being HIV positive. They offered to bring the girls to the hospital if they wished to visit her. I also shared with them the troubling evidence I had gathered about Marissa. Dad asked me to send the details to his email, which I did immediately. "It's really bad," I admitted over the phone. "It's all right, son," he reassured me. "We'll handle this together." Once I had sent the email, I called Gina to inform her of the latest developments. She was also taken aback, but mentioned that this would allow her to finalize the divorce papers more promptly. I then contacted Marissa's office to inform her colleagues of her accident. They expressed their condolences and promised to visit her. The following 2 weeks were a blur of activity. I found a suitable 2-bedroom ground floor apartment with an attached garage and secured it by paying the deposit and 2 months' rent up front, using funds from Marissa's half of our joint account. When the girls and Loretta arrived, we packed up all of Marissa's belongings, including our wedding album, and moved them to her new place. During this hectic time, I also received the results from the DNA lab, confirming that both girls were indeed mine. This was a small yet significant relief amidst the chaos. I met with the insurance adjuster to inspect the wreck of Marissa's car. Both of us were astounded she had survived the crash given the state of the vehicle. Since the car and insurance policy were in her name, the insurance company would issue her a check directly. I gathered the last of her belongings from the car and brought them to her new apartment, trying to close this painful chapter and focus on rebuilding our lives. A week after the accident, during a phone call, my mom asked, "Did you stop by Marissa's?" "No, I haven't," I replied, meaning since that initial visit. "Why?" she inquired. "I was just wondering," continuing with a tone of concern in her voice. "She's made it clear she doesn't care about us and wants to escape everything," I explained. "I'm giving her what she wants, just not how she planned it." 2 weeks later, I visited my doctor. Thankfully, I was clear of the gonorrhea Marissa had passed on, but we were still waiting to see if there was anything more serious. Physically, I was nearly healed, but emotionally, I was far from recovery. Later that day, I called my boss, Alan, to tell him I'd be returning to work, which pleased him greatly. That afternoon, the hospital called to say Marissa had woken from her coma. The nurse suggested I visit that evening, which worked well for me. I updated Gina, who had already filed the divorce papers and was waiting for Marissa to regain consciousness so the documents could be served. She arranged for the bailiff to meet me at the hospital. Next, I called Loretta to see if she would join me at the hospital. I then spoke to my daughters. "Your mom's awake," I told them. Their response was lukewarm, both shrugging off the news. "I'm going to see her this afternoon. Would you like to come?" "No thanks, Dad," Lisa replied firmly. "I'm too mad at her right now." "Me too," added Ginger, "and I've got a lot of homework." "All right," I said. "I'll drop you off at your grandparents' then." By 4:30, I was driving them to my parents' house. I told them Marissa was awake and that I would be meeting Loretta and the bailiff there. "Let us know how it goes, son," Dad said as I left the girls with them. "I will," I assured him. "I'll come back for the girls afterward." "Good. Then you can have some of Mom's lasagna when you get back," he said, offering a comforting smile. Mom's lasagna had a way of making any day better. "Sounds perfect," I said, feeling a slight lift in my spirits as I headed to the hospital. He handed her the documents. "You are being served with divorce papers," he stated formally. Marissa took the papers, her hands trembling slightly. There was a long pause as she scanned the top page, her face draining of color. "I see," she finally murmured, setting the documents beside her on the hospital bed. I turned to Loretta, who had remained silent, her expression somber. "Loretta, thanks for being here," I said. "Of course," she replied softly, her eyes not leaving Marissa. Turning back to Marissa, I felt a mix of relief and sorrow. "We needed to resolve this," I told her, "for everyone's sake." Marissa nodded, her eyes downcast. "I understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never wanted it to come to this." "I know," I said, although I wasn't sure if that was entirely true. "But here we are." The room was heavy with unspoken words and tension. I decided it was time to leave. "I'll let you rest," I said. Marissa didn't look up. "Thank you, Greg, and I am sorry," she added, her voice cracking slightly. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak further. Loretta and I exited the room, leaving Marissa with her thoughts and the reality of the papers she now held. Outside, Loretta squeezed my arm. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I will be," I answered, managing a small smile. "Thanks for coming. It meant a lot." She hugged me briefly. "Call me if you need anything," she said. "I will," I promised. As I drove away from the hospital, the weight of the past week seemed to lift slightly. The future was uncertain, but at least now there was a path to begin moving forward. The process server handed Marissa the envelope and snapped a picture. "You've been served," he declared briskly before exiting the room. "You couldn't even wait until I was out of the hospital?" Marissa asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "No," I replied firmly. "You were the one who wanted to run away. I'm just accelerating your timetable by a few years." Her eyes searched mine for any sign of the man she once knew. "Do the girls know?" she asked, her tone shifting. "Yes, they do," I confirmed. "And they're not too fond of you right now, which is why they aren't here. And you don't need to worry about being burdened with them. I'm seeking full custody, though I'm willing to grant liberal visitation rights if they decide they want to see you. But as of now, they don't." Her expression faltered, clearly not expecting such decisiveness on my part. "And I suppose you hate me too?" she ventured. "Hate is a strong word," I countered calmly. "Let's just say my opinion of you has significantly diminished." She nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of my words. "Do you think you could ever forgive me?" she asked, a hint of desperation in her voice. "Maybe someday," I said, "when I can look at our girls and not see the hurt you've caused. And just so you know, I had their DNA tested. They're mine." Her eyes widened slightly, surprised by my proactive approach. "That won't change anything, Greg," she murmured almost to herself. "I see," I continued, shifting the topic. "When you're discharged, you won't be coming home. I've rented an apartment for you. Loretta will help you move in." Marissa turned to look at her sister, who had remained silent until now. "All your belongings are already there, and the utilities are set up in your name," I explained further, pulling out another envelope. "Here's your half of our joint savings, minus the deposit and 2 months' rent for the apartment. Since your car was totaled, you'll also be receiving an insurance payout." She took the envelope from my hand, her touch hesitant. The room filled with a thick silence that seemed to stretch between us, laden with the finality of our fractured lives. She took the envelope and nodded her head. "By the way, I know about the escape fund you set up. My attorney has frozen that account. If you sign the divorce papers, she'll release the funds," I said, minus my half, of course. Marissa added, her expression a mixture of shock and resignation. "I'll fight you for it," she declared defiantly. "I don't think that would be wise," I countered, "unless you want all the evidence I've gathered to go public. It's quite damning." Her defiance seemed to deflate at my words. "Have your lawyer review the papers. I believe you'll find the terms are as fair as they can be under the circumstances." Marissa turned to Loretta, seeking support, but found none. "You should have listened," Loretta said coldly. You lied to everyone, Greg, your kids and me. I agreed to help you move into your apartment when you're discharged, but after that, I'm done. You need to sort yourself out. Marissa started to sob. I'm so sorry, she cried, looking for some sign of sympathy from her sister. That and a few bucks will get you a coffee, Loretta snapped back. I won't let you near my family again until you make things right, starting with a genuine apology to your husband and daughters. Through her tears, Marissa looked at me. Greg, I'm so sorry. I know it doesn't mean much now, but I do love you. Right, it doesn't mean much, I replied coldly. Sign the papers, Marissa. She nodded, overwhelmed and silent. Goodbye, Marissa. As I turned to leave, she called out, Greg, can I call the girls? Please, you can call them, I said, pausing at the door. But it's up to them if they want to talk to you. I understand, she murmured. Thank you for that, at least. You're welcome, I said without turning back. I left the room, aware of the disapproving glances from the nursing staff. They might not have approved of the timing, but this was not their decision to judge. Driving away from the hospital, I headed to my parents' house. There, surrounded by family, I tried to find some solace in a hearty serving of my mom's lasagna, letting the familiar comfort of home soothe the sting of a painful day. The divorce process concluded smoothly. 3 months later, I found myself not only legally free from Marissa, but also relieved to learn that I was HIV negative, a fortunate result mirrored by Marissa as well. To my surprise, Gina presented me with a check for over $450,000, half of the secret account Marissa had amassed. With no immediate need for such a sum, I allocated it into college funds for Lisa and Ginger. Life adjusted to its new rhythm for me and my daughters. They were my anchor, keeping me grounded amidst the challenges of single fatherhood. Although managing teenage girls on my own was sometimes trying, my mother's advice and support proved invaluable. Marissa, on the other hand, seemed to be settling into her role as a single divorced woman. After a year of cautious interactions, the girls began to reconnect with her, spending an occasional afternoon together. Marissa had resumed her real estate career with a new company following an unceremonious exit from her previous employer due to disclosed indiscretions. According to the girls, she was performing well and had shed her deceptive tendencies. Meanwhile, I noticed an increasing amount of attention from the single women at church. They often sent me home with homemade dishes, from pies to lasagna, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by my daughters. Dad, you need to start dating again, Lisa encouraged one evening. It's not good for you to be alone, she added. I wouldn't even know where to start, I confessed, feeling out of touch with dating. And, I'm not alone, I continued. You two keep me quite busy. We won't be around forever, though, Ginger chimed in, with a mix of seriousness and humor. It's simple, Dad. Just ask someone out to dinner. You can do that, right? Reflecting on Ginger's words, I realized she might be right. It was perhaps time to explore life beyond fatherhood. That very Wednesday, I encountered Rhonda Carson at the church's coffee shop. Rhonda, a widow who had lost her husband to a tragic accident and was raising her teenage daughter solo, had recently given me a casserole that I had particularly enjoyed. Hi, Rhonda, how are you? I initiated, recalling the comfort her dish had brought. Hanging in there, Greg, she replied. How about you? I'm doing okay. Really enjoyed that casserole last week. Thank you, I said, hoping to spark further conversation. That's good to hear. It can be tough managing on your own, can't it? She sympathized. Yeah, it's a challenge sometimes, but we manage, I agreed, finding common ground in our shared experiences as single parents. Over coffee, we delved into the intricacies of raising teenagers alone. Encouraged by the ease of our exchange, I took a bold step. Rhonda, I'm pretty new to this, but would you like to have dinner with me sometime? Maybe this Friday? I asked, feeling a mix of anticipation and nerves. She smiled, her response warming my heart. Yes, Greg, I'd like that, she accepted gracefully. Great, I beamed, feeling a flicker of excitement about the possibilities ahead. How about trying that new Texas Roadhouse place? Sounds perfect, Rhonda agreed. It's a date then. Leaving the coffee shop, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in a long time. Perhaps it was the right moment to start anew, not just for me, but for everyone involved. The girls were excited about my date with Rhonda, and they liked the idea of spending the evening with Linda, so it was all set. That Friday, I invited the girls over, and we went out to dinner. Rhonda looked really cute in her denim skirt, and we had a great time. We didn't get too intimate that night, but Rhonda gave me a heartfelt kiss as I dropped her off at her house. I caught a glimpse of 3 faces peeking out from her window, and it looked like they were cheering us on. Rhonda hugged me and said, "That was the best night I've had in months." Me too, I replied. What if we do this again soon, she suggested with a smile. Maybe next time we can have a quiet evening in, she hinted playfully, her hand gently brushing my leg. I felt a spark of excitement. That sounds like a plan, I agreed, enjoying the flirtation. The girls were thrilled about how well the date went, and honestly, I was too. Spending time with Rhonda felt natural and refreshing. While I'm not certain where this might lead, I'm open to exploring where our next steps might take us.
I was at my desk enjoying a mid-morning coffee that my assistant brought me, though she used artificial sugar. I threatened to switch to black tea instead. I was thinking about a copyright issue that needed immediate resolution, but the federal government was delaying the release of sensitive material. They were slow as usual, making it hard to get anything done. Federal employees showed extreme incompetence, avoiding responsibility without direct orders. I wondered how many people handled a letter before action was taken. I was stuck, unable to move on to my next project, and facing financial loss if items had to be destroyed. The rise of liberal concerns had complicated simple matters, even changing job titles. I felt too old for this nonsense. "There's a young lady here to see you," said Jackie Stoddard, entering my office. "She wouldn't give her name but handed me this picture." As I looked at the photo, dread filled me. Son of a cow, I thought. Why now? It was a picture of Sharon, my ex, and me on our wedding day, taken 18 years ago. It reminded me of the pain, cheating, and tears. People assumed I had returned to lick my wounds, and they were right. Back then, I didn't understand money or power, but I had changed since. "Ask her if she's Susan or Sandra Press," I said, handing Jackie a USB drive and a Ziploc bag. "If she is, show her the video on this. If she wants a copy, give her everything and return the original to me. Come back afterward, and I'll answer your questions." At 42, I embraced bachelorhood. My short marriage to Sharon Grace McCormick had ruined my trust. Now people had to earn it, which was hard. I stood 6'4" with a 38-inch waist, weighing 200 pounds. I worked out at the gym for 2 hours after work. My brownish-black hair was graying slightly, and I still turned heads. I had a few casual relationships, but marriage and love were not for me. About an hour later, Jackie returned, leaving the door open. She explained that the young lady still had many questions. She sat down, her serious face showing she wouldn't leave without answers. Looking at me with her emerald eyes, she waited for me to speak. "Do you know which one it was?" "Sandra," she replied. "Who is she, and why was she so shocked?" She cried, saying, "We've been lied to all our lives. If my heart's right, he was lied to as well." "Sandra is one of a pair of identical twins. The clip you saw was her mother's last words to me before our first divorce hearing, 7 months before the twins were born. I found out about them through friends and wasn't informed she was pregnant. The rest of the items on the stick detail what would happen if I contacted them. Her father, then with the CIA, got me fired from the FBI with false charges because he hated me. The documents imply there's a contract on my life if I interfere with them. He was a powerful, dangerous man. She divorced me to marry my former best friend, with whom she'd been having an affair for months. As far as I know, he's their natural father." "How did she find me, and what does she want?" "Sandra found an old picture in their attic with your name on it, Googled you, and recognized you. She also found the original marriage certificate and divorce papers. She tracked you down through Facebook and other web searches. She came to find a bone marrow match for her twin sister who is running out of time." "Why come to me? I'm not their father. It doesn't make sense," I replied. "Her mother was with her father months before I knew her. Her father ensured that. Sandra suspected something and convinced doctors to run a DNA test during the bone marrow test. Mr. Press isn't their biological father." "What do you think?" Jackie's expression turned into a big smile as tears formed in my eyes. If Sandra was right, it meant my ex had lied to me all those years ago. I wondered if I might be their father. "I knew she was related to you the moment I saw her," Jackie said, standing up. "She has a look that makes it clear." "Are you ready for perhaps the biggest shock in years, Jackie? Send the information on the stick to my publishers. Tell them to release it in a way that can't be traced back to me and not to disclose my writing name because my life might still be at risk. Stress that it needs to be made public quickly. Then find someone to do a fast DNA test and set up an appointment. If I am their father, I want proof when I confront their mother. If it's true, I need a litigation lawyer to fight for my parental rights. Clear my schedule. I need to go to Susan's hospital ASAP," I said. "Now I've got to find Sandra." "Sandra, come in and introduce yourself," Jackie called. Sandra walked in, and the moment I saw her, I knew. She looked just like my younger sister at 16. I choked up, overwhelmed with emotion. Sandra and I both started crying. Jackie took a few pictures with her phone to capture this life-changing moment, and then left us alone. Sandra and you have an appointment for blood testing at 1. They promised a rush job, and I charged it to the corporate card, Jackie said when she returned. I also arranged for you to meet your sister Barbara at Kuntel's at 3 and reserved a private table. Sandra needs to see what we do. Barbara will make sure her kids are taken care of. She knows you have important family news. I stood there, emotional and unsure, watching Sandra walk towards me. I had so many questions. I hugged her tightly as Jackie closed the door. It was hard to grasp that I might be a dad. Sandra seemed to feel the same, trembling as we left my office. We tried to keep things light, taking baby steps to figure everything out. After arranging for the clinic to email the report, we headed out for a late lunch. I learned that Sandra had skipped school and driven all day until she had to rest at a station. I was furious that she would do something so risky, but held my tongue, realizing I might be reacting like an overprotective dad. It also reminded me of something I would have done at her age. When we arrived at Cantel's, I noticed Barb's car. I know we're here to meet your sister, but why did Jackie set this up without talking to you first? Sandra asked. You're about to see what Jackie and I saw when we first met you, I replied. It will explain why we believe you and Susan are my daughters and why I was shocked when the test came back positive. Can I call you Dad? Sandra asked. I laughed and smiled. I'd love that. Cantel's was a family restaurant, a step up from Red Lobster with an excellent reputation. The owner and hostess led us to our private booth immediately. I ordered a bottle of champagne and extra tissues. Barbara had her back to us, so I asked Sandra to wait while I approached. Hi, sis. Thanks for meeting me, I said. Barbara looked up and said, You look happy. What's going on? Barbara, stand up. There's someone I want you to meet, I said as Sandra approached. This is Sharon's daughter, Sandra. Barbara turned and stared, looking like she saw a younger version of herself. They had similar features, long brunette hair, high cheekbones, small ears, light blue eyes, and warm smiles. Oh my God, Barb exclaimed. Paul, you should have warned me. This is unbelievable. How long have you known about her? About 5 hours, Sandra said emotionally. I surprised him at his office. Jackie and Dad knew immediately. Seeing you, I understand why. The server returned with tissues and understood why we needed privacy. Barbara, between tears, explained 3 more people would join us, so the hostess moved us to a larger table. Barbara called her husband to join us and notified our parents to come quickly, calling it a family emergency. Mom asked what was wrong, but Barbara said she couldn't explain. We were all emotional. I got a text from Jackie saying the publisher had released the information, and it would be on the 6 o'clock news. We had just calmed down after our first glass of champagne when Barb's husband and my parents arrived. I laughed hearing my dad's loud voice. There better be a good reason for this. Barbara and I stood to greet them. Mom, Dad, Lou, I'd like to introduce you to Sharon's daughter, Sandra Press, Barbara said proudly. My mother instantly recognized the resemblance and smiled widely, filled with pride. She finally had the granddaughter she always wanted. My dad was stunned, speechless for once. When he finally spoke, he said, I see it, but it's hard to believe. My mom sat beside Sandra, holding her hand tightly, too emotional to speak. My dad ordered 2 more bottles of champagne, his pride evident. After our glasses were refilled, I stood up with mine. I need to explain, I said as Sandra started recording with my phone. I shared how we met and what had happened that day. My dad then stood up. Sandra, we don't need a DNA test to confirm what we already know. Welcome to our family. You have 2 more aunts to meet soon. Promise us you'll always consider this family your home. Sandra took the phone and spoke. I came here seeking the truth, not knowing what I'd find. Today has changed everything for Dad and me. We didn't know until now. Meeting Aunt Barb showed me what unconditional love is. My twin sister Susan will feel the same. I scanned the table as everyone became emotional. Even my father, who never cried, had tears in his eyes. My mom held up 2 fingers, crying louder. I captured everyone's joyful tears before stopping the recording. Sandra added her and her sister's info to my contacts and texted Susan, showing me the video she sent. Sandra's message read, If what we think is true, the DNA test will confirm. Watch the 6 o'clock news. Love, your twin. My mother asked if she was still in disbelief. Sandra showed her photos of Susan and herself. My mom demanded copies for her laptop, displaying them on the full screen for all to see. Sandra then turned off her phone and put it back in her purse, making me realize no one knew where she was. My phone rang. It was Susan. I stood up and walked away to answer it. My dad noticed me tearing up and looked at me questioningly. Sandra mouthed, "It's my sister." My dad nodded, understanding, and I answered the call. "Hello, this is Susan. After seeing the video, I had to call," she said. "Mom won't be home until at least 7 because she's stopping at the police station for an update on Sandra." I'm pretending to know nothing. "The police were here earlier and left their card. Any ideas on what I should do?" "Get him to watch the 6 o'clock news and pay attention to what's revealed about me. Tell him you'll talk when your parents aren't around and show him the video. Give him my number and ask him to text first before calling. He'll understand after watching the news," I replied. "Once we have the DNA proof, Sandra and I might bring the whole family." "What do you mean?" Susan asked. "After explaining Sandra's actions to help you, the family will spread the word. I don't know how many will come, but those who can will," I explained. "Why?" she asked. "Family," I said. "In the Patterson family, blood is thicker than water. If I'm not a match, someone else might be." "Just like that?" Susan asked, doubtful. "No doubt. You'll see," I said with a chuckle. "We are strangers after all." We talked a bit more before saying goodbye, and she replied with relieved sobs. After ordering dinner, I explained to the family why Sandra was here. Immediately, cell phones started buzzing, calling others to spread the word and gather potential matches. My mother took charge of organizing everything. "Sandra, how did you get here?" my father asked. "I drove my old 1994 Voyager van. It's one step up from a rent-a-wreck," she laughed. "It's in Dad's parking lot." "Son, take that van to my dealership in the morning. She's not driving back in that. It's a miracle she made it here," my dad said firmly. "At her age, you had as much sense as she does. She's determined." "What do you plan to give her?" I asked. "She can pick one out," he replied with a wink and a smile. "If I could choose, it would be a 4x4. I love the outdoors," Sandra said. My dad responded with a big grin because we all loved the outdoors. If the weather allowed, we were fishing, camping, or hunting. He started reminiscing about the summer I learned to water ski in barefoot, sharing as many stories like he was holding court. Both my parents insisted that Sandra stay with them for the night, agreeing it wouldn't look right for us to be alone. After dinner, Dad drove them to her vehicle and then drove it home. My mother was thrilled, already planning to spoil her new granddaughter. Dad ended up waiting until 1 a.m. for them to get home. Around 10 p.m., the police investigator called me. It took him 2 hours to complete a background check on me. The media was buzzing with questions about the information I released. We discussed the situation and related problems. Seeing the 3 generations in the video had answered many of his questions. I told him we were rushing DNA tests to confirm our relationship and that Sandra was with my parents. Once confirmed, we would return to see if I could be a match for Susan. I asked him to buy us some time and promised to update him on our progress. Susan later told me he reported back to her about our discussion. I was confronting my past again, but with a new perspective. This time, I wouldn't be intimidated by my ex-wife's family's power and money. I would use the media, the courts, and the truth to my advantage. I had the resources, the proof, and a growing determination. I didn't seek revenge, just justice through the truth. I was ready to take on 4 people and the federal government. The next morning, I was in my office, ensuring any schedule changes wouldn't affect me much, and setting up tasks for Jackie while I was gone. Jackie kept checking the email accounts like an overprotective mother, questioning me about my day and extracting all the details she could. To be honest, I never tired of looking at Jackie Stoddard. In her youth, she must have been every teenage boy's dream. Her naturally styled brown hair accentuated her soft features, and her piercing emerald green eyes and full lips were still captivating. As a single man, I often admired her, but was thankful she never caught me looking. Finally, she received the DNA test results, printed them, and exclaimed, "It's confirmed! You are her father!" Jackie immediately called the lab to send the information to Susan's specialist and began searching for the toughest litigation lawyer in New York. After vetting a few, she selected the best and arranged a Skype chat. The lawyer agreed to work on a percentage basis, confident it was a slam dunk with the DNA proof. We would go after my ex-wife, her husband, and her parents for denying me my parental rights. The restrictive court order against me would be squashed, proving their deliberate actions. The supposed contract on my life, even if not factual, would demonstrate their attempts to intimidate and control. The lawyer saw the potential for a significant case, even before involving the government. I told Jackie to send a gray, dust-covered box from the safe to my new lawyer. It contained legal proof that Sharon's father had tried to destroy my career and marriage. It had taken years to collect this evidence through various government levels. I later learned that the police officer had released the video, turning the story into a runaway daughter finding her biological dad to save her sister's life, causing a media frenzy. "Mom, it's confirmed," I said on the phone. "I'm a father twice over." "Thank God. Be ready to leave tomorrow at 7 a.m. from the car lot. I'll spread the news." "Have you called your daughters?" Mom asked. We were now on the road, driving a fully loaded 2-year-old Ford Explorer to Oswego, New York. Sandra and I led the way with my parents in a tour bus and 33 other vehicles following. The tribe was on its way when my phone rang. Sandra answered and put it on speaker. "You're being tracked by CNN," Susan said after our greetings. "There's a tour bus with a sign saying the Carlsons are coming. 1 out of 141 should be a match. Well, we have the DNA test proving he's our father. I've got a new 2-year-old Ford Explorer," Sandra replied. Dad said, "If it was confirmed, a lot of family would come, but I never expected this," Susan explained. "It's given me a new hope I never imagined. I can't remember feeling this good." Dad's family spread the word and people came out of the woodwork. I met so many relatives this morning. It will take multiple introductions to remember their names. I met first, second, and even third cousins. "I'm so proud I want to change my last name to Carlson," Sandra stated. "I never knew families like this existed. I was so overwhelmed I almost went off the road." That's when I decided to write this amazing experience into my next book. My daughters were still talking about Sandra's experiences when Susan said she had to go. Her mother had just entered the room. "Dad, are you okay?" Sandra asked with concern. "I saw you get very emotional." "How do you expect me to feel? I discovered I have 2 daughters raised by my ex-wife and a former friend without my knowledge. One is vibrant and full of life. The other is on the verge of dying. One is so strong and independent she moved mountains without thinking, just like I would. And she wants to take my name," I replied with pride. "Emotionally overwhelmed," Sandra replied. "I was so focused on saving my sister's life. I didn't think about the impact on you. I wasn't a good match because I inherited a defective gene from our mother. The emotional problems I've caused will be felt for days. Can you forgive me?" "For what? Coming into my life? Turning everything upside down? No, that's what living is about. You've given everyone another person to love. You've given me a chance to be a real dad," I said through tears. "Your grandparents adore you. My mother is so proud. Seeing her face in you means everything. You and your sister have become her favorites by birthright. She's been spoiling us. We went shopping, and if she bought me an outfit, she got one for Sue, too. She laughed, saying she had years of spoiling to catch up on. That's Mom. You'll find it impossible to distance her from you." "I know, I've tried," I said. "Barb and my sisters will brag about this for weeks. By the end, this will become a family legend shared for years." We learned that as soon as Sharon saw the live news feed about our arrival, she began having severe panic attacks. The walls she had built were crumbling. Susan, feeling vibrant and strong, confronted her as soon as she turned off her phone. "Mom, why did you hide the truth about our real dad?" Susan asked. When she got no answer, she pressed harder. "You hid the truth from us, made decisions about our lives. What gave you the right to play God? Even Dad didn't know. If Sandra hadn't found out about him and sought the truth, would you have let me die?" Sharon had no answers, never expecting the truth to come out. Her father had hated Paul from the start and did everything to drive him away. Thankfully, Susan's doctor walked in at that moment. "We received DNA from a man we didn't know, proving he is Susan's biological father. He is coming to be tested, and there's a good chance he's a bone marrow match. He should be here tomorrow afternoon, and for his protection he'll be under guard," the doctor said before leaving. "Mom, my bio dad is coming with 140 others in case he's not a match. He wants to give me a fighting chance," Susan stated. "He's risking his life to help me." "Why?" Sharon asked. "To him and his family, blood is thicker than water. Though I'm a stranger to them, I am family, and family comes first," she replied. "You had to know we look like our real dad's mother. Watch this video. It proves everything." Sharon watched the video of my family meeting Sandra. There was no doubt. 3 generations shared the same face. She could no longer deny the truth. Her daughters had proof, and her husband's actions were backfiring. Then a man appeared at Susan's room entrance asking for Sharon. When she admitted she was Sharon Press, he handed her a large legal envelope saying, "You have been served." Sharon fell to her knees, sobbing. Susan, furious, felt no pity. "Mom, why did Grandpa put a contract on my bio dad's life?" Susan asked, knowing she wouldn't get an answer. Arnold Franklin Press had just left a corporate meeting. As he walked down the hall, he was served with legal papers. He sat down in the reception area to read them. The first document was a lawsuit against him and his wife for denying Paul his legal rights as the father of his daughters. The second was against his in-laws and himself, accusing them of conspiring to ruin Paul's marriage and career. It was clear Paul was seeking revenge, demanding sole custody of his daughters. He argued that if Sandra hadn't found him, he would never have known about them. He claimed moral abandonment, suggesting Sharon and Arnold would have let Susan die to keep their secrets. Proving otherwise in court would be difficult given the media coverage. Arnold remembered when he and Paul were university roommates and football teammates. Both had pursued Sharon, but Paul won her over. Arnold had even been the best man at their wedding. However, Sharon's father never approved of Paul due to his background. He convinced Arnold to pursue Sharon, and Arnold agreed. With her father's influence, Paul was kept busy with FBI assignments, leaving Sharon and Arnold alone together. Eventually, Sharon and Arnold became lovers while Paul was undercover for 2 months. Her father had recorded their affair and confronted Paul with the evidence when he returned. Sharon, unaware she was pregnant, thought her missed periods were due to stress. Delighted, her father saw Paul file for divorce immediately. When the twins were born, they knew Paul was the father, but her father had already gotten Paul fired with false charges. It took Paul 4 years to clear his name, during which he left the area in disgrace. Meanwhile, Sharon and Arnold married and had 2 sons. The unedited tapes would prove the conspiracy between Sharon's father and Arnold to break up the marriage. Arnold now wondered how Sharon would react when this truth came out. Sandra, I, and the group arrived at our final stop of the night around 9, exhausted after 14 hours of driving. We ordered a light meal to our rooms and quickly fell asleep until the 5 a.m. wake-up call. Sandra and I left early because I had a secret meeting with the police officer and an FBI representative. The rest of the group left at 7 for the 6-hour drive. Sandra dropped me off at the Oswego Police Department, where I met Detective Peter Rogers and FBI agent Chad Girardeau. We discussed my former father-in-law's questioning for over an hour and a half. I provided my lawyer's contact information and left a USB stick with all my evidence. I was placed under official protection until I left town. With a security escort, I was taken to the hospital for a blood draw to see if I could be a bone marrow match. As I approached Susan's private room, I heard Sandra and Susan talking. The hospital staff recognized me by my writing name, and I signed a book for one of the nurses. I walked into Susan's room. "Dad," Sandra said in surprise. "I didn't expect you so soon." "Susan, this is our dad, Paul Carlson." Susan looked frail, her skin loose and her face reflecting the closeness of end of life. Despite this, her smile was wide and her eyes were bright with hope. "Susan, they're rushing the test. It should be done in 30 minutes. The rest of the family is checking into their hotels. My parents are having their bone marrow drawn now and will meet you soon. If there's more than one match, the doctor plans to do a double transplant simultaneously in both arms," I said, trying to keep my emotions in check. Susan broke down in tears. I sat on the edge of her bed and held her until she calmed down. Sandra captured a photo of us both crying tears of joy and relief. She was glowing with pride, and rightly so. I realized how much she had done, and I was overwhelmed seeing my 2 daughters together for the first time. "Grandma, Grandpa, come in and meet my sister," Sandra said. The 5 of us talked for over an hour until Susan's doctor entered smiling. My mother and I were perfect matches for Susan. Dr. Proctor asked if we were ready to be checked in for surgery at 6 a.m. the next day. We both agreed. My dad whispered, "Thank God." We prayed for a miracle all the way up. "Don't you need my parents' permission?" Susan asked. "Normally, yes, but we received a court order this morning thanks to Mr. Carlson. It allows us to proceed if he or a relative is a match. The judge agreed that your mother and her husband weren't putting your needs first," Dr. Proctor explained. "Mr. Carlson will cover all costs not covered by insurance." Sandra smiled. "I'm not surprised, sis. With what Mom and Arnold did, Dad had no choice. Legally, he had no rights, so we used the courts to prevent any delay. A security guard then informed us we were about to be on national news. Susan turned the TV to CNN, which revealed my identity as the author of a popular book series worth an estimated $40 million. Sandra, Susan, and the doctor were amazed. My parents looked at me in shock. They had no idea, thinking I was just an independent corporate financial advisor. "My God, Dad," Susan said. "I've read all your books. They're great." I laughed. After my former life was destroyed, I had to reinvent myself. Writing was my therapy. The first book's success was a turning point. and it grew from there. I keep my books current, exposing the raw truth about world situations, societal views, and morals, whether people like it or not. For the first time in 15 years, I checked into a hospital, along with my mom. My new daughter wanted to share a room with me, but the hospital's security wouldn't allow it. Sandra spent the evening running between 3 different rooms. My dad called some relatives to update them. Sharon and Arnold weren't pleased when they arrived after work. Their attitude was met with coldness. Susan told them she was being prepped for surgery and would receive a double bone marrow transplant in the morning due to a court order. "How?" Sharon asked. "Mom, Arnold, my biodad and his mother are perfect matches. Both are donating so I can get a double dose and recover fully," Susan said. "Mom, do you know who Jason Blackstone is? He's your favorite author." "Well, Jason Blackstone is a pen name for Paul Earl Carlson, my biodad." Sharon and Arnold turned pale. They had hoped the court case would disappear, but Paul's net worth showed he wasn't after money. He wanted justice. Paul always believed in law and order, which made him a successful agent until his termination. "Mom, did you know your father has been in FBI custody all day? You might want to check with Grandma to see if he's home. Can you explain why this is happening? Sandra and I want to know," Susan said with a big smile. "Sandra's somewhere in the hospital, either in Dad's room or Grandma Patterson's if you want to see her." Sandra and I were in my hospital room discussing how she would handle her mother when Sharon found her. A security guard knocked and poked his head in. "Mr. Carlson, do you know a Jackie Stoddard?" I said, "Yes." He opened the door and Jackie came in. Jackie had been my sidekick for 10 years. I had supported her through her divorce after her husband got his assistant pregnant. She was now 35 and a single mother, still adjusting to single life, but still wore her wedding diamond. My family and I loved her, and I often wondered why she hadn't found someone. "What are you doing here?" I asked. "I'm here to do what I always do. Look after you. Dr. Proctor said you'd be here for at least 3 days and suspected you were a match. Your arm will take a week to heal enough for light activities. I booked a private jet and a hotel using the corporate card," Jackie explained. "Sandra texted me, 'Dad, FYI, she loves you. She couldn't stay away.'" I raised my eyebrow. The guard poked his head in. "Sharon and Arnold Press want to see you. Will you allow them in?" "Only after they've been searched," Jackie said. "What's your relationship with Mr. Carlson?" the security officer asked. "I'm his fiancé. Didn't you see my ring?" Jackie replied. Sandra winked at me and mouthed, "Told ya." I laughed. As Sharon and Arnold entered, Sandra spoke. "Dad, I wouldn't trust these two for a moment," she said. "They're just trying to cover their backs." "You don't know the half of it, Sandra," Jackie began. "Your dad's lawyer has video showing your stepfather receiving a check from your grandfather as payment to break your parents' marriage. If successful, he would manage your grandparents' finances for a 3% annual fee." "How do you know this is true?" Sharon asked. "And who are you?" "Mom, she's Dad's fiancée and a master researcher. Her name is Jackie Stoddard. I trust her more than you," Sandra said firmly. Sharon's face went white. Her daughters were distancing themselves from her, and there was nothing she could do. "Jackie speaks the truth, Sharon," I explained. "I ordered my lawyer to release all the video and audio tapes to the FBI, including a letter from your father admitting he paid for the recordings. Your father's hatred for me was so great, he didn't care about the cost or who he used to get what he wanted." "Is this true?" Sharon asked Arnold. Seeing his expression, she knew it was. Sharon realized what she lost when I divorced her, the only man who truly loved her. "Jackie, a word of advice. Don't let others manipulate you like I did. Paul, I want to talk to you alone after the surgery. Right now, I need to go home and reflect. Sandra, will you walk with me to my car?" Sharon asked. Sandra said, "I'll be back soon. Mom and I need to settle a few things. Jackie, watch over Dad till I return." We watched them leave. Sharon held it together until she exited, then started to cry. Both Jackie and I understood she had no idea what had been done until now. Arnold, born with a silver spoon, was paralyzed by fear. The truth had come out and their life was shattered. Sharon would never trust him again. "Paul, I dreaded this day. I thought you'd never return. If we had met accidentally, I could have brushed it off," Arnold stated. "I never saw this happening. It's best I leave and say no more." He left, leaving us alone. I looked at Jackie, making her blush for the first time. I was looking at her the way a man in love should. For once, I was opening myself up. Was she playing me? Was she finally admitting her true feelings? Did I love her as a friend or something more? Either way, my daughters had awakened me. I'd been living in others' shadows, finding joy in their excitement instead of creating my own. "Jackie, we have a lot to discuss while I'm in recovery," I said softly. These last few days have awakened me. I got complacent, settling for the sidelines instead of being in the game. "Paul, when I got divorced, you stepped in. My kids were still young. You've been more of a dad to them than their own father. From baseball games to father-daughter dances, you were always there. I know why you pay me well, more than the usual rate. You want to ensure the kids in your heart are looked after," Jackie said. "On their birthdays, you always went overboard, making them the envy of their friends. During summer breaks, you took us on special trips, creating lifelong memories. You answer their questions like a father should. They love you, and you love them. Your only problem is your fear of commitment." I tried to speak, but couldn't. Jackie was right, and her words hit me hard. So did Sandra's. I walked over to Jackie and sat beside her, taking her hand. I looked into her eyes, gathering my thoughts. Sharon cheated me. Her father's power intimidated me. My best friend betrayed me. I lived with an ongoing threat on my life. I put myself in protection mode. Until a few days ago, I didn't realize it. Now that I have, can we go on our first actual date? Or is it too late for you and me? I asked. "Took you long enough, you old fool," Jackie said before kissing me. "I'm texting our kids to tell them we're now a couple and working things out." "Pretty sure of yourself," I said. I texted Sandra, thanking her and asking if everything was okay. Sandra responded, "Mom didn't know. She's taking it hard. Won't be back tonight. Let Susan know." Jackie and I went up to Susan's room. After introducing Jackie as my girlfriend, we told her what had happened earlier and showed her Sandra's text. We had just finished when my sister Barbara entered. "I just had to meet her," Barbara said. "Jackie, what are you doing here?" "I want to say something." But Barb figured it out. "He finally clued in, didn't he?" she said with a smile. "Took him long enough." "Susan, this is your Aunt Barbara, and the man entering is your Uncle Lou, Barbara's husband," I said. "You'll soon learn we speak our minds, like it or not." I excused myself and went to the nurse's station, texting Sandra to ask about Susan's pizza preferences. She replied that Susan likes everything but anchovies. I ordered 3 extra-large pizzas and 3 2-liter colas for quick delivery. I also called Dad, asking him to bring Mom up in 30 minutes for a pizza party. We pushed the no-eating for 8 hours rule, but got carried away. The head nurse came in to calm us down, but left with a slice of pizza. Later, she stopped me and said, "Your actions lifted the spirits of the whole floor. I can't thank you enough." At 4 a.m., they took me and my mom to prepare for the operation. We supported each other until we were wheeled in. I stayed awake until the medication kicked in. When I awoke, it was done. Now came the waiting and praying. Dr. Proctor informed everyone that the bone marrow transfer went well, but it would take a few hours to see if it took. It did. Hearing this, most of the family started preparing to go home. "Jackie," I said, "is the worst patient ever." "But I'm not sick," I replied. "You're like a bull in a china shop, impatient, unruly, and miserable." "Keep it up and you'll get a bad reputation," Jackie told me. Jackie said my mother was doing well. Once she was sure I was stable, she gave me my phone back. The first texts I saw were from Jackie's kids, both asking, "When does she get her engagement ring, Dad? When do we meet our new sisters?" "Jackie, your kids are smart," I said, showing her the phone. "I told them I was coming to Oswego to watch over you. After the operation, they had a lot of questions and the whole story came out. They weren't surprised. They said, 'Mom, he's always treated us like his own. Most of our friends wish their dads were like him. We've always seen him as our dad,'" Jackie explained. She read the note and looked at me with tears in her eyes. "I guess we'll have a short engagement," I said with a smile. "Have you heard from the twins?" "Sandra and her mother are with Susan. She's doing well considering everything. Even though she's still medicated, she's asking a lot of questions," Jackie disclosed. "Sandra told her about the pizza party. Susan can't get over how much she looks like her aunt and grandmother. She can't wait for a girl's day out with them when she recovers. Find me my pants. I want to see her myself and then check on Mom," I said. The nurses tried to stop me, saying it was too soon after surgery, but I insisted. So off we went, holding hands. Surprisingly, my pain was manageable. Jackie and I noticed Susan's improvement immediately. Her complexion was better, and the sparkle in her eyes almost brought tears to mine. "Who are Tammy and Timothy Stoddard?" Sandra asked. "My children, ages 13 and 11. Why?" Jackie replied. "I got a Facebook friend request from them this morning. So did Susan," Sandra said. "You both need to read what they sent me," I said, handing Sandra my phone. She read it, smiled, and passed it to Susan. I want this back to add their phone numbers to my contacts, I said. Sharon then asked if she could talk to me privately, so we went to the waiting room. Paul, I had a long talk with my mother last night. She admitted remembering Dad's hate towards you, but never expected this. My daughters want to finish the school year here and then live with you. They want their last name changed to yours and feel what Arnold and I did is unforgivable, Sharon disclosed. I can't argue with them. They made it clear they'll go to court if I refuse. They no longer trust me, and I can't blame them. Will you let them come? You know my family. They wouldn't let me refuse no matter how I felt. I will gladly take them. So will Jackie. We'll just need a bigger place. I'll drop the suit against you if you agree to joint custody, I replied. The suit will still go forward against the rest of your family. The twins are old enough to decide the rest. Sharon agreed to joint custody. I offered to pay for their name change, but she declined. We walked back into Susan's room together. The girls watched us intently. Jackie, it looks like we're going to need at least a 6-bedroom house, I said. Jackie smiled, and the girls screamed with delight. Sharon said, Girls, your father and I agree. You get your wishes if Jackie agrees. I'll call the lawyer tomorrow to start the legal process for your name change. Paul, Jackie asked, are you ready for this? A house with teenage kids? No one is ever ready, but we'll adapt. I'm just getting used to the idea of 2 carrying my name, I said. Make that 4. Tam and Tim want you to adopt them. They're already signing their names as Carlson. Jackie said, Call Roger Mouser's firm to start the paperwork, then text the kids to let them know our plans. Let's find out which area has the best schools so we know where to look for our new home. Sandra picked up her phone, opened her contacts, and made a call on speaker. Hello, Tammy said. Who are you, and what do you want? This is Sandra, your soon-to-be older sister. Is Timothy with you? Sandra explained. Can you prove it? Because I can't, Tammy said. Dad taught us not to take calls or messages from unknown sources without proof. Seriously, are you scamming me? Tammy, Paul and I are getting married, Jackie said. You were talking to Paul's daughter, Sandra. We're all going to be Carlsons. Susan and I are changing our last name, and your dad and I have started the process for him to adopt you and change your name to Carlson too, Sandra added. Sweet. Let Dad know it's about time. How is Susan? Timothy replied. We've been waiting to hear. Jackie and I exchanged a look, witnessing the first conversation of our blended family. She squeezed my hand in support. I am improving, Susan said. So far, so good. I'll text you both so you can add my number. Susan, Sandra, our dad is the only father we've known. Our bio dad was gone before we knew him. Your dad has been better than any of our friends' parents. Mom's been in love with him for a long time. When we get together, we need you to accept that we're all siblings, nothing more, nothing less. Tammy and I won't let anything come between them, Timothy said firmly. Both of my daughters agreed. Jackie, with tear-filled eyes, said, They're showing your morals and standards. You should be proud they took your values to heart. I was. We said goodbye for now and headed to see my mom. Dad was with her when we walked in, taking them by surprise. My dad saw a look from Jackie that made him smile. He knew something was up. Mom, I said, you're up and about already. Have you seen Susan? How does she look? Her complexion is improving and her spirits are up, so it's looking good, but it's still too early to tell, I replied. We need to have a serious talk if you both have the time. We're not going anywhere, so let's get to it, my dad responded. Susan and Sandra will live with me after the school year. They'll change their last name to ours, I said. Sharon agreed to joint custody and the name change. It was the twins' idea. That's wonderful, both my parents said. That's not all, Jackie added. Your son has decided to make an honest woman out of me. Elizabeth, are you ready to help plan a wedding? My mom got teary-eyed, and my dad had a big smile. They didn't have to say they approved, we knew. I will be adopting Tammy and Timothy, and they will take my last name. Also, Jackie and I will start house hunting as soon as we get back, I added. What got your head out of your back? My dad asked. We all knew how you both felt about each other. I've been trying to get your mother's approval to knock some sense into you. Earl Carlson, behave yourself. You're not at the yard selling a car, Mom said. Jackie, have you thought about your wedding plans? We haven't discussed it much, but since we're blending 3 families, it should be a family affair. Barb can be my maid of honor. Lou Paul's best man, his brothers-in-law as ushers, Susan and Sandra as bridesmaids, Tammy is the flower girl and Timothy is the ring bearer. Dad, will you walk me down the aisle with my father? Jackie said with a grin. Depends on who's paying the bill and if the 19th hole is stocked with Jack Daniels, Dad replied, laughing. What do you think, Paul? Jackie asked. It's perfect. It will unite us all. If that's what you want, let's do it, I replied. Should we invite Sharon? Both my parents firmly said no. Mom, Dad, in the next few weeks, the media will reveal a lot. I'm suing the federal government, Sharon's parents, and her husband. I believe Sharon was as much a sufferer as I was. I paid the price years ago, and now Sharon is paying in ways we can only imagine. She thinks she's lost her daughters forever, I explained. Inviting her might help the twins and her forge a new relationship and move on from the past. Jackie and my parents looked at me in awe. Where did that wisdom come from? My dad asked seriously. These last few days have taught me a lot, I replied, holding Jackie's hand. Sandra's arrival made me grasp life again. We returned to my room, and I quickly fell asleep, exhausted from the surgery. Jackie stayed by my side and watched the news. Christopher McCormick and Arnold Press had been arrested for lying to the FBI. The person behind the contract on my life turned state's evidence. My lawyer released details of my firing from the FBI, prompting an internal review. When I woke up, Jackie filled me in. Dr. Proctor informed us that my mother and I would be released the next day. You'll need follow-ups and to get your stitches removed, he said. Susan is doing better than expected. The big question is how she'll respond as she's weaned off her meds. We talked to my parents, who decided not to leave the city until Susan was on the road to recovery. They would fly back with us on the private plane. Dad booked into the same hotel as Jackie, and the bus driver was instructed to head back. Over the next few days, the media exposed the deception, backstabbing, and political deals that ruined my marriage and career. They spent a day discussing how Sharon's father manipulated her into believing the rumors and lies. Sharon was publicly dissected like a frog. Jackie and I were headed to visit Susan one last time before going home. Dr. Proctor had proudly said she was on the road to a full recovery. Someone must have disliked the negative press about the Fed's past dealings with me, because the security release my publisher and I were waiting for was granted. Over 1 million hard copies would be released to the market within 2 weeks. I had 2 first editions delivered overnight. After I signed them, Jackie wrapped them, and we hid them in a shopping bag. We made sure Sandra would be there when we entered Susan's room. Your dad and I have set the wedding date for the first weekend in August. Aunt Barbara will be my maid of honor. I was wondering if you two would be my bridesmaids, Jackie asked. Susan exclaimed, Hell yes. Jackie, when I first walked into Dad's office, I was scared stiff. You recognized me immediately and said, You're Sharon's daughter. How are we going to handle this? It stunned me. You accepted me from day one. I will proudly be in your wedding party if you'll allow me to call you Mom. I watched as the 3 of them hugged. It was wonderful to see Susan literally jump out of bed. When things settled down, I pulled out the gifts and handed them each a signed first edition of my book, with the message, To one of the 2 prettiest ladies who call me Dad, with love, Jason Blackstone or Paul Earl Carlson. Susan was ecstatic when she unwrapped it. It was my biggest book yet, over 600 pages. Her face glowed with pride, knowing it wasn't released yet. She flipped open the cover, saw my note, and then lost it. Dad, you've already done so much. I didn't need this, she sobbed, running into my arms. Before you came into my life, the hospital staff said I had only a few days left. Sandra knew it too. I don't know why she went into the attic, but I'm glad she did because it brought us you. She hugged me tightly, and Sandra watched us for a few seconds. Dad, you should know. Dr. Proctor believes if Susan had only gotten 1 transplant, it wouldn't have worked. The double transplant shocked her body into responding. In the last 6 days, she's gained 10 pounds, Sandra explained. I didn't know if you would come, but you didn't hesitate. You brought a tribe. Thanks to the family, I'm getting my best friend back. How's your mom holding up? I asked, trying to change the tone. She's filed for divorce and is going to therapy to deal with a lifetime of lies. She now understands what you went through and is ashamed, Susan said. She says only someone who has experienced it can understand that it's a living hell. Her work and friends are her support. Mom is strong and will get through it. The key will be getting her to trust again. Right now she doesn't know who or what to believe. Sandra, even with family support, it can take years to regain trust. It requires an unexpected act of faith. For me, it was Sandra walking through my office door, I said. Thank God you did. Paul had me believing I'd die an old maid waiting for him, Jackie added with humor. Now girls, Stand by your father so I can capture a few photos. The best one will be an 8x10 for his desk." When we stepped off the plane, we were surprised by Jackie's parents and children there to greet us. The kids nearly knocked me down with their excitement, which spread to all of us. My dad enjoyed hearing them call me Dad. I realized Timothy would have 2 older sisters and 1 younger, just like me. Tammy hugged my mom and said, "I'm glad you're becoming my grandmother." I reflected on how quickly my life was changing with unexpected blessings. Jackie and I decided to shelve our pre-Sandra plans until after the wedding. Jackie knew our needs, so I let her handle finding a new home. This gave me time to write my first fiction book. My previous works exposed corruption and cover-ups. We stayed in touch with the twins, and Jackie found a 20-acre property with a barn needing repair. Susan was improving and returned to school part-time. We had a firm design our house with steel and brick, including an outdoor kitchen, large patio, pool, and a 4-bay garage. Jackie's reduced office time let me work harder, with an editor from my publisher helping. I wrote over 300 pages, publishing my first book under my real name. Sharon used my lawyer to divorce Arnold, securing alimony and education costs. My cases were in mediation as they lost the will to fight. Tammy, Timothy, Jackie, and I awaited the twins' arrival after their last school day. Timothy saw them driving up our new driveway. We all went outside to greet them. As they stepped out of the Explorer, I realized Susan's recovery was so remarkable I couldn't tell her from Sandra. Jackie whispered, "We'll figure it out." Timothy, playing big brother, carried their luggage as Jackie showed off the house. In my office, 3 copies of my latest book, Unexpected Blessings, sat on my desk. It was a fictionalized story of us,